You guys all set, everybody? All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here and the opportunity to update my third budget as governor of the state of California. And I wanted just to begin to contextualize a little bit about the prioritizations that we are looking to advance here in this year's 2021-2022 budget. I want to contextualize not only in terms of what our prioritization will be, but also talk about the journey we've been on as a state over the course of the last 12 months, because I was standing right here less than 1 year ago presenting the 2020-2021 budget, and has so much changed. And I think it's incumbent to understand where we're going, where we've been, and to talk a little bit, I'll briefly talk a little bit in the opening about that journey over the last 12 months. And then I'll end with our priorities in terms of what we hope to advance in terms of immediate action. But I want to just begin by focusing self-evidently on the obvious, that our budget understandably represents and reflects the realities of this recession and the realities of this pandemic-induced reality, particularly as it's related to the issues that have impacted low-wage workers, small businesses, as well as decades-long inequalities, those pre-existing conditions around race, ethnicity, the pre-existing conditions around wealth disparities and income disparities obviously have come to the fore and must be addressed. And I want folks to know that our budget reflects an understanding of those realities and an intentionality in terms of addressing those realities. Now, the predicate in terms of our focus on a budget is the reality of getting out of the freezers and ministering into people's arms these vaccines. We must do that in order to safely reopen for in-person instruction, our schools, to reopen our small businesses, as well as businesses large and small all across the state of California. Our goal must be to provide more resources, more discretion, more opportunity for low-wage workers, for workers at all spectrums, to provide more resources, allow for more investment, more spending in our economy. And clearly, as always and understandably, our urgent focus must be and maintain our focus and vigilance on the issue of wildfire preparedness in this state. But here, again, I want to contextualize. I'm here on January 8th. Last year, we were here on January 10th. Last year, less than a year ago, we were talking about a 10-year expansion of our economy here in the state of California. We talked about how we had weathered the Great Recession from a 12.3% unemployment rate and brought down the unemployment rate to a record low 3.9%. We were discussing whether or not it was 117 or 118 consecutive months of net job growth in the state. Regardless, a record number of months back to back with consecutive job growth. 1 out of 7 jobs in the United States of America were created right here in the state of California. We were reflecting on the fact that we had an average GDP growth of 3.9% over the prior 5 years. That was less than 1 year ago today when we presented the budget. It was a budget that reflected $21 billion in reserves, a record high. We had focused a lot of energy picking the baton up from the extraordinary work that Governor Brown did, paying off that wall of debt. We had just fulfilled our commitment to do that with an additional $4.5 billion payment, paying off the $34.7 billion wall of debt. And we were starting to talk about our long-term liabilities. We put out a $9.1 billion plan to start paying down not only our STRS and PERS obligations, but our health care and retiree-related costs. $9.1 billion multi-year pension plan we presented. That was a year ago. Less than a year ago still, on January 26th, we had the first reported case of COVID here in the state of California, and everything changed. So much so that we we're experiencing what the rest of the nation, for that matter, people around the globe were experiencing. You can see here the chart. This is the United States real GDP growth. While it's been relatively consistent, a few dips, nothing like you see in the far right of this chart. Projected GDP decrease of 26.5% actually manifested more acutely with a decline of 31.5% in the spring of 2020. California was not immune to that contraction. Our unemployment went from 3.9% to 16.4% just in a few months. Our GDP growth, again, at 3.9%, we were then dealing with the realities of a 30+% contraction. 1 out of every 6 jobs now not created, but now lost in the state of California just between February and May of last year. That $5.6 billion surplus, which, by the way, was understated, that $5.6 billion budget surplus gave way to a $54.3 billion deficit, a literal $60 billion swing in our finances in just a blink of an eye in just a few months. Our numbers changed, but our values did not. And I think this is just important to underscore as, again, I contextualize where we are today by reflecting on where we've been on this journey together over the last 12 months. The numbers changed dramatically, a $60 billion swing, but our values did not change. We collectively, working with the legislature, we made tough choices to temporarily bridge to a brighter future. We drew down those reserves we had been building for years and years. We committed ourselves to government efficiency, not just rhetorically, but we started looking at travel and cell phones. We started looking at car purchasing, strategies to consolidate leases, telework, online services. Our public employees gave back close to 10% of their salaries. My staff gave back 10% of their salaries. We postponed many of those supplemental payments. We deferred a lot of investment. I'll talk about that in a moment. And we advanced cuts. We refer to them as trigger cuts in hope and expectation that we can get some more support from the federal government. At the time, we were hopeful, didn't materialize in the time that we anticipated, but we enacted tough decisions on the basis of those trigger cuts. But the things we didn't do, and this is why I want to emphasize this notion of values, is we didn't impact our public education system in a meaningful way, at least to this degree. No permanent cuts, no permanent layoffs. We actually provided $5.3 billion of federal funding to focus on the issue of learning loss and address the issue of equity, broadly defined, roughly 80% of that investment into a frame of equity, looking at the issues of learning loss in the context of supports for distance learning and address some of the challenges associated with those with special needs, low-income English learners. We focused our efforts and our energies to extend and commit, even in that climate, to our earned income tax credit. We went from $400 million 2 years ago to $1.1 billion that's been distributed in the last few months here in the state of California. We didn't make cuts to CalWORK. So often you see welfare cuts. We didn't make cuts to Medi-Cal. So often you see medical cuts to the most vulnerable. We continued our expansion through Covered California and our subsidies up and through supporting the middle class. We invested in job growth and we invested in our economic recovery, and we ultimately landed on a $202.1 billion balanced budget. Not an easy journey, a challenge the likes of which we've never experienced in such a contracted period of time. Numbers changed, but our values did not. Where are we today in the context of this moment? Clearly, California is poised for an economic recovery. That unemployment that peaked at 16.4% is now literally cut in half. A lot of work still to do, but the employment rate has been cut in half. We are in a different position vis-a-vis even the rest of the country. You can see reflected here, U.S. versus California in terms of our real GDP, always outperforming the rest of the nation. This is a chart that, just because of the nature of how it was constructed, appears to be a V-shaped recovery when we know it's more like a U-shaped recovery. But the gist of what you're seeing here is reflected in the fact that California is not only poised for recovery, we're seeing real signs of recovery in our state. And as a consequence, today we are presenting a spending plan, an investment plan, a balanced budget. It's $227 billion, $164.5 billion that is reflected in the general fund. Here's the remarkable news I humbly submit, considering where we were just a few months ago as we worked together in June to address that $54 billion shortfall. Here we are just a few months later with a budget that now enjoys $34 billion in resiliency, and that's defined by what we have in our reserves and what we are enjoying in terms of a surplus. Let's look at the reserves. Here we are again, reserves that are actually higher than this time last year. We're projecting $22 billion in reserves, a record high in this budget. 15.6 you see in the rainy day reserve. The school stabilization reserve, who would have imagined $3 billion in the public education stabilization reserve. Our operating reserve, we are posing a $2.9 billion cushion. In our safety net reserve, which was established years ago, Holly Mitchell and others, $450 million. We are committing more now, not less than even a year ago, to address our long-term liabilities. $9.5 billion now, not $9.1 billion. $3 billion of additional payments to STRS and PERS and to our retiree health care. $6.5 billion additional over the next 3 years. So $9.5 billion to pay down those long-term obligations. I hear you. We recognize our responsibility. And yes, we know that $10 billion roughly is a drop in the bucket, but how many states are using general fund to pay down long-term retirement liabilities like the state of California? We are projecting, if you include the operating reserve, $2.9 billion, a $15 billion budget surplus for the fiscal year. We are projecting, more importantly, we're proposing to the legislature a record investment in our public schools. Unprecedented in California's history, $85.8 billion, the highest investment per pupil that the state has ever advanced. We are investing in our energy and our focus to deal with the disproportionate impacts of this pandemic on the issues impacting our low-income communities disproportionately. And that's why we're putting $4.6 billion up to extend learning time, to provide supports to our schools, more summer school, and before and after school programming. Other supplemental supports in this flexible package, but an additional $4.6 billion that's building up the 5.3 last year on learning loss. This year, we want to focus this, again, flexibility, similar to last year, but more emphasis, more focus on extending learning time because of the clear challenges and strife that so many of our families are struggling with the current distance learning model. 3.84% COLA this year. And we are providing, because this is often asked, so I thought I'd provide up front, an additional $3.8 billion above the Prop 98 guarantee. That's a $2.3 billion supplemental payment that includes the resources we're investing in STRS, a little bit of PERS, and then some teacher support programs, which I mentioned right here. Look, at the end of the day, if you want to address the issue of achievement, we know there's no greater boost to achievement than teacher preparation, period, full stop. We know that. There's no real debate about that in terms of at least the data. As it relates to that, we also know the programs that work, and we made investments in the last few years, and a number of these programs are very familiar to all of you, but we can't do enough. And so this year we'll make another down payment on doing more in teacher training and recruitment. These are grant programs. Our Golden State Teacher Grant Program and our residency program, that's focused on special needs, low-income communities. Great programs, classified school employees. This is important credentialing program. It may not seem like a lot, but it's important. It's taking employees and getting them credentialed, getting them the credentials so they become real employees with the credential. Professional development, we're working in partnership with UC on this subject matter expertise around reading and math, urban and ethnic studies. And it's an exciting, novel partnership that we're advancing this year. I am committed. I said this when I first got here, not just interested to invest in special education. I hope you'll take a look at this slide. $1.5 billion we've invested just in the last 2 years in special education, $545 million ongoing. This year we're investing an additional, again, this is our proposal to the legislature, an additional $300 million to focus on infants, toddlers, and preschooler. I was one of these kids with learning disability. I have a strong bias in this space, and I have a strong resolve, despite a lot of headwinds, to do more and better. And yes, I know that $300 million on top of even the additional resources we provide are not nearly enough. We're on a journey together, and I want to be there along the way to do more and do better. And I look forward to working with the legislature. And if this is an area where they want to accelerate further support, I am all in. And so just wanted to highlight this investment because we're looking at historic investments in special education in this state. I referenced a moment ago those deferrals. We have about $13 billion in deferrals in our K through 12 system. I'll talk about the billion plus in the community college K through 14 in a moment. But of those deferrals, roughly 2/3 of those deferrals we are paying off this year. There's about $3.7 billion remaining, but $9.2 billion we will pay down if, again, the legislature adopts the principle of this budget. The issues around immediate action are paramount. We can't wait in this environment. We can't wait, as we traditionally have, for the fiscal year to end, to adjudicate and dialogue around the give and takes of budget. There's certain things that require urgency. And as I said in the outset, I'll end on this, what our urgency package is. It certainly includes this, or referred to as immediate action, that we hope to see in the next few weeks. And that's a $2 billion investment to safely, can't do it safely, we can't do it, but to safely reopen our schools for in-person learning. That's our default, safely reopening schools for in-person learning. In order to do that, our testing programs have to be in place, protocols, our partnerships, management, labor, administrations, districts, school sites, all of that has to be put in place. We've talked a lot about this in the last few weeks, but the focus is on our youngest kids first, TK to 2, and then build on that age cohort through the spring and fund the needs of our low-income English learners and foster youth. Again, an eye on equity. And look, I don't think this, my wife is here today. We know this through our lived experience with 2 very young kids and 2, well, at least kids that are a little older. I don't know if 11 is not defined as young, but it's very challenging to have a 4-year-old who you're most of the time saying, don't look at the screen, get off a screen, to say, hey, look at this screen in order to address the needs of a distance learning environment. We know it's challenging, and those kids are falling through the cracks. And we have all the support in the world. I can't imagine what's happening for millions of other children. This is why this is so important. And we know, for that younger cohort, that the social emotional benefits of in-person instruction are foundational, not least of which, and my wife would be the first to remind, not just me, but all of us, if we're going to be serious about equity defined from a gender paradigm, women cannot re-enter the workforce disproportionately unless we address the importance and the imperative of getting our kids back safely in schools, to address more broadly reopening our schools, but also reopening our businesses and providing that workforce that our businesses need in our recovery. So that's why we're promoting a $2 billion immediate action package and promoting that and directing it to the legislature. That said, here's the estimate. People are asking, what are we projected, what's anticipated to be received from the new federal act that was just provided. We estimate about 6 points, and this number will change. I say this is anticipated. Please put this as estimate, about $6.7 billion. By the way, this is additive. This will not substitute. We're going to have another $6.7 billion to invest in our school system. This budget, the budget that's in the printer, that went to the printer, was done before we got the details, which literally are coming in every day, of the new federal relief package. So this entire budget, please caveat with that consideration. Here is a specific proof point of $6.7 billion that we will work with the legislature to prioritize in terms of additional investment above the investment that I just laid out. Let's talk about investments. We talked a lot last year about our parents' agenda, foundational, and that is our investment in early childhood and early childhood supports. ECE issues of 0 to 3, not just 3 to 5, not just Head Start, but early Head Start, not just preschool, but TK and K, all the frameworks build the architecture of life. Now, since 2019, we've invested about $400 million of ongoing funding, a lot more in one-time funding to advance our child care and our ECE programs in the state. Again, a down payment on a commitment that we have advanced more formally by the creation of a master plan working group that put out a master plan for early learning and care. They just put out a report. It's a big number to achieve the ultimate goal of providing quality care for all 4-year-olds and all income eligible 3-year-olds, to have the appropriate ratios, to have the appropriate reimbursements. To do all of that is going to take years. Like being honest with folks, not naive about the challenge. Even if you wanted to do it, you couldn't spend all the money and provide the quality that's foundational in terms of the expansion. But now we have a plan. We never had a plan before. A lot of hard work. And so many leaders in this space that worked hard on that plan, and we want to commit to a down payment on that plan. $250 million for incentive grants to match some of the work that's happening with early TK programs up and down the state. The infrastructure investments, again, we got to build out these classrooms. It's a big impediment. $200 million more professional development in this space, and obviously more ongoing support for child care. You recall we consolidated our child care functions, and we've now got them under one roof. After years and years of fragmentation, we've now focused under one roof. We're beginning the process of child care bargaining, which is the first time we've done this in state's history. We're really proud of that, and I want to thank our partners, SEIU and others, for their advocacy, and the legislature for supporting that cause. And that's also happening in real time and will be advantageous in terms of our collective efforts. But none, perhaps more than this, and that's the $1 billion that we are looking to receive for child care and early child supports and Head Start supports from the federal government. And so that additional resource investment is going to be profoundly significant to further accelerating our efforts in ECE and child care. So we look forward to working with Member McCarty and others who've been just incredible champions in this space, and working to adjudicate the merits and demerits of which supports we should provide, which priorities we should advance first in terms of those efforts. I want to talk now about higher education. And that's a framework of concern for many of us that have watched a significant number of people drop out of our higher education system because of this pandemic. We, as a consequence, want to prioritize our re-engagement with students that have left. And you'll see that reflected in subsequent slides and further investment. We need to make further investment. We need to invest in more ongoing support. We do not believe it's time for tuition increase or fee increases. And we do believe it's time to invest more in student aid across the spectrum. And that's exactly what this budget proposes. Community colleges specifically, we're looking at $250 million, $250 million of financial aid grants. We hope some early, not immediate action with the legislature on this because of the urgency of the moment and concerns. Basic needs becoming more and more important, food and housing, so that's why that number is a little higher than it's been in the past, 100 million. Mental health, I could spend the entire time talking about K through 12 education and the issues of mental health and well-being. We could talk entire budget about those issues of wellness associated with this pandemic, but real resources we are now providing for community college specific to advance the mitigation of those behavioral health issues as a specific task, at least proposal in this budget. Enrollment growth, modest, more professional development, and yes, I am committed, and this is stubborn, to addressing the, I'll say it, the racket that is textbooks in this country. Usurious costs associated with textbooks. And so we're going to do more this year. We did a little last year on open source textbooks. More on that, I can assure you, coming soon, because we in California have an obligation to disrupt that entire system nationwide. As it relates to deferrals, I mentioned the $13 billion, two-thirds of which we address K through 12. Here's roughly similar percentage. We are addressing $1.13 billion, the community college, $326.5 million remaining. As it relates to issues of education, workforce, obviously a big part of what community college does, not exclusive to community college, but community college is a real driver. We're providing in this budget, at least proposing, $353 million of new workforce development investments. Perhaps the most important, the biggest investment we are proposing is $250 million, $250 million, to focus on linkages between our higher education system and gainful employment. This has been, we have to do better in this space. At the end of the day, and people can debate this, and we can all go back and forth. What's the utility of a degree? Is it about citizenship? Is it about creative thinking? Is it about, it could be a lot of things. Or is it just about getting a job? People land in different places, and wherever their values are, that's where they land. I happen to think it's many, many things, but it's also about getting a job, especially in this economy. And so we've got to connect what's really happening in our workforce to what we're educating in terms of that human capital being conveyed off that conveyor belt for talent, the CSUs, UCs, and community colleges. So we want better alignment. And so we've been talking about this. We got to start doing something about this in a much more meaningful way. Remember, we put together this Future of Work Commission, really looking about where future of work fundamentally is going. We, by the way, put that together before this pandemic. We've just seen that accelerate. New work styles, new arrangements, telework, all what's happening in terms of platform providers and the gig economy, the digitification of our engagement. And all that requires now renewed energy, renewed thinking, and us to move much more expeditiously. And that's what this $250 million reflects. Apprenticeships, no substitutes for these high road training partnership programs, work-based learning. Just a real believer in work-based learning. You can intellectualize things, you can experience things. There's a reason Cal Poly is one of the finest universities in the world. Both Cal Polys, not just Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but also Pomona. And so work-based learning is foundational. We also have some partnerships with UC Prime around healthcare, $12.9 million. Anyway, you'll see a lot more energy and investment in the workforce place. Let's talk CSU. The two systems, CSU and UC, we are proposing $786 million in new money, ongoing and one-time, deferred maintenance, emergency financial aid, computing talent initiative. Not just the UCs should be focusing on computational investments and focusing on education in that space, but CSUs as well, and clearly professional development as always needed. So additional $425 million at the CSU. UC could see similar investment in one time as it relates to the subject matter projects I mentioned, and to help our K through 12 educators, more professional development, emergency financial aid. You'll see a number there, 20 million, Institute of Science and Innovation. I want to applaud former Governor Davis, did something that deserves a lot more attention. He developed these partnerships that are still thriving across this state to focus on taking sort of an academic discipline and translating it into a meaningful construct, meaning manifesting an intellectual frame and creating frameworks to advance and accelerate innovation and discovery and the entrepreneurial spirit that defines the best of the state. There are institutes across the state, partnerships, biotherapeutics, bioinnovation, issues related to IT across the spectrum. We want to invest some money in that space and really invest more energy in building on those outstanding partnerships. So $361 million in the UC space. But here again is a significant slide and a significant part of the conversation we'll be having with the legislature. Upwards of $3 billion of additional support for higher education. $3 billion, 2.9 anticipated coming from that federal act. I know a lot of folks were disappointed that federal stimulus wasn't even larger. I'm disappointed because I do think more discretionary money needed to come to states and local governments in particular. But you got to acknowledge these are significant investments that will enhance our efforts here in the state substantially and provide a real injection of support, particularly our UC and CSUs. So $2.9 billion. Look forward to working with the legislature in terms of, and obviously leaders, and the two new leaders at CSU and UC, the Board of Trustees and the regents, to make those investments and to make sure those investments are well utilized. Speaking of investments, not lost on anyone, the importance imperative of continuing our investments in testing and contact tracing, isolation, quarantine, focusing, yes, on vaccinations, which I imagine maybe the only reason anyone showed up today to talk about vaccinations, as well as additional supports across the spectrum for state response. We're putting $4.4 billion into this budget. Not all of that is general fund. We expect a substantial portion, disproportionate number of that to be reimbursed, but this is the dollar figure. Remember, $13 billion last year in the last, at least, fiscal year, and 4.4, at least since the beginning of the pandemic, 13 billion, 4.4 billion emergency response we're putting related to COVID relief in this budget. 372 for vaccines. Here's a slide that's also important, anticipating additional resources coming from the feds, additional $350 million for vaccines, and $1.7 billion for testing and tracing. So that's an open-ended question, is do we use that money to offset these investments, or do we add on top? And that's a question for the legislature. That's a question we have to dialogue. And I want to make this crystal clear so people understand the federal supports, with the exception of the Prop 98, the federal supports have discretion in terms of, do you add more support or do you substitute the general fund support and then redirect those dollars? There's discretion in that bucket. There's not in terms of those school dollars, K through 12. And so the question, or the $98 more broadly defined. And so the question here is this vaccine number additive, or can we use a portion of it? How much flexibility exists? Is it really 1.7 for testing and tracing? Can we provide more support, use some more of those dollars for vaccinations, PSAs, culturally competent outreach, address some of the stickiness as it relates to people wanting to administer or even rather receive these vaccinations? So again, all that will be debated, all that be discussed, and obviously we have a real partner in 12 or so days with President-elect Biden that will make that task a lot easier, and we look forward to that. Now, one task that's not easy is getting this economy moving again. We mentioned the 16.4% unemployment rate peaking out in May. It's half that today. It's still stubbornly too high. I want to get back down to those historic low numbers, 3.9, roughly 4%. We want to do even better than that. So we're looking at $4.5 billion economic recovery package. We socialized this a few days ago, so I won't belabor it too much, except to say we have some immediate action that we hope we can take together in partnership with the legislature. And that's $575 million in small business grants. These are grants, not loans. These go to nonprofits, not just small businesses, and cultural institutions. We're also looking for fee waivers, $70.6 million fee waivers, just to give you a spectrum, at least a sense, about 59,000 bars and restaurants licensed in the state of California. This would go directly to those businesses that have been disproportionately impacted by stay-at-home orders and this pandemic-induced recession. Manicurists and barbering, folks in that service industry as well would be beneficiaries of these fee waivers as well. About 55,000 establishments in that cohort that would benefit from these fee waivers. So want to get these grants out. This 575, as you know, builds on the money that we're getting out right now. These are $5,000 to $25,000 grants that we are putting out. In fact, we just opened this process up. I encourage people to learn more about it, covid19.ca.gov, covid19.ca.gov. Make themselves aware of the first $500 million, and then with immediate or early action, we could provide an additional $500 million, get over $1 billion+ of grants out the door as quickly as possible to help our businesses at this incredibly challenging moment. We also are promoting more investment in our Cal Competes program, about $180 million existing tax credits, about $250 million of a new grant program, credit program that would be administered through the same construct that's well defined through the Cal Competes process, but just expand the universe. We think this will increase our competitiveness, our retention strategies. We're not going to roll over. We're not giving up on economic development, and we're not rolling over or giving up in terms of our dominance, in terms of startups, innovation, entrepreneurialism, and world-class headquartered companies. So that's part of the strategy to make an investment in that space. Our Main Street hiring tax credit, $1,000 tax credit for employees up to $100,000 per business. We put $100 million up last year, at least a few months ago with the budget. We want to build on that, put another $100 million. We've got loan guarantees, put $125 million in that space. And the iBank, these are folks that fall through the cracks in the SBA loans, not getting the PPP loans from the feds. And we want to provide additional supports in that very successful program, women, minority-owned businesses that disproportionately have benefited from those current investments. We want to build on that success. We have the sales tax exclusions. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment to push out the boundaries of innovation, particularly as it relates to green energy, transportation. And then this, what seems modest, but to me it's significant, these are $10,000 seed grants in the California Dream Fund. These are important grants for people that truly fall through all of the cracks. And this is a real lifeline for many, many businesses. And what seems rather insignificant from a Cal Competes frame, a few $1,000, a few $100 could be the difference between keeping those lights on or turning them off permanently. And so that's what that $35 million represents. We are putting additional, I just want to remind you, the $52 billion 5-year capital plan. I'm not including roughly $10 billion that we're investing. Thank you, all the leaders on SB 1. Thank you to the voters for doing the right thing in terms of supporting SB 1. Getting those dollars out. People say, well, what are we doing on infrastructure? We're putting out close to $10 billion this year. We're talking about EV infrastructure in a second. These infill infrastructure grants I'll also talk about in a second, but I wanted just to highlight on this screen additional $300 million in deferred maintenance. It's our parks, our judicial branch, the courts, water systems in the state. This is additive, another $300 million. This is stimulating in terms of the economic benefits, direct and indirect jobs that are created from these types of investments you see on this slide. It's why we are highlighting it here, the $300 million on deferred maintenance. We hope legislature will consider even putting more resources in this space. We think that's critical in addition to our 5-year, $52 billion capital plan. Here's the resources we anticipate, close to $3 billion in transit, state highways, transit. Can't come at a better time, particularly for our transit agencies. Again, this is just hats off to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, her incredible leadership, stubbornness on the other side, aside, her incredible leadership, her stewardship, her faith and devotion to this cause of helping you, all of us, get through this very challenging time, demonstrably exampled here in this roughly $3 billion investment in our transit systems, which have been battered by this recession, as well as investments in our roads, bridges, and highways. Speaking of investments, we think there's urgency to get money into people's pockets. You recall that first slide. And that's why we're proposing a Golden State stimulus to basically make those $600 checks that people are starting to receive from the federal government to get them to be $1,200. We want to get roughly 4 million checks out within 3 weeks of me signing this package. We can get these dollars out quickly. Luis Reyes, all these incredible leaders that were on a Zoom call the other day promoting this. Just thank you for your leadership, your support of this effort, leadership of the Speaker and Pro Tem, so many others, including clearly our two budget chairs, Ting and Skinner. Thank you for your consideration of this program. We want, with urgency, to move with immediate action to get $2.5 billion, $2.4 billion into the pockets of 4 million Californians, to help them with evictions, to help them with rent, to help them with utilities, to help them with childcare, to help them with food, help them with the spectrum of supports they so desperately need at this moment. And that's why I reference an extension on the eviction moratorium. We have to get that done. July, or rather January 31st, is the deadline of our agreement that we were able to socialize last August. It expires at the end of this month. So with urgency, we need to move to get that extension. As it relates to additional supports, there's about $2.6 billion that the federal government is offering this state and jurisdictions with populations north of 200,000, meaning the $2.6 billion you see reflected in this slide of additional support for rent and utilities coming from the federal government. Not all of that comes to the state. About $1.4 billion does, and $1.2 billion goes to those local jurisdictions, a little smaller than the last coronavirus CARES Act. These are, again, municipalities with 200,000 population, not the old 500,000. And so we want to make sure, the key here is to make sure the state and locals are working collaboratively to make sure whatever we do at the state level with our existing supports and other programs, we're doing strategically and thoughtfully, and that it parallels our thinking and our strategies around addressing the evictions question by the end of the month. So all of this is happening in real time, and it's an incredible moment in terms of anxiety, but an incredible moment of opportunity to address these issues. I know David Chu, so many others are working on this. Our pro tem's been incredible. Tony Atkins on this, so many folks committed to this cause, working overtime. We look forward to that engagement over the course of the next number of days, not just weeks. Here on the housing front, evictions to housing, here's what we've done the last few years. Billions of dollars, unprecedented. I know we say that a lot and means nothing in terms of, well, what does it produce? Well, it's produced a lot, just not enough. Again, good enough never is. No one's naive. But we've done an unprecedented amount in tax credits, unprecedented number of dollars been invested in loans, infrastructure grants, the likes of which we've never done in the past. And we finally got that excess land survey done, and we've got partnerships in South Lake Tahoe and Stockton and Sacramento, more work still to happen in that space. I just want to remind you of some of that work. We want to build on that. $500 million. We want to put additional investments in our low-income housing tax credit program. We're going to put additional, this was the reference a few slides ago, additional $500 million. There's two programs. One's a brownfields program, $250 million. There's another just more traditional infill grant IGG program, or IIG program that we did last year, sidewalks, roads, lighting, utilities. This was an impediment that came out of our conversations with the cities in particular, but also some counties around getting housing going, the inability, particularly for small communities, to even invest in the surrounding infrastructure. And so that slowed down housing production and starts. We want to address that $500 million we're putting back in this budget, building on what we've done the last few years. And then no substitute again for these incredible apprenticeship programs. But if we're going to accelerate our production, we got to have a workforce. And that workforce we hope to support through that construction apprenticeship program. Here's also two new things we're doing. One's creating this new housing accountability unit. It's all about accountability at all levels of government. You recall, and certainly folks down in Huntington Beach recall, 2 years ago, we were not shy, but we wanted to go after what we believe was the neglect in terms of addressing the issue of housing, meeting the housing goals, and meeting the goals that this state needs to advance in order to create some supply-demand balance because of the current imbalance, because of the lack of production in this state. And so we've got this new technical assistance program, a new unit we're going to create. And let me just make this clear to all my friends. I was a former member of our county board of supervisors. This is to monitor city council meetings. This is to monitor board of supervisor meetings. planning commission meetings. We're not going to wait for an article to be written to be proactive in terms of holding local government accountable to increasing housing production. So that's the point of this unit. And then the implementation of AB 434. Let me thank the legislature for bringing this to our desk, that I had the privilege to sign this piece of legislation. This is a new single application and scoring system. It's all about streamlining. It's all about reorganizing, addressing time value of money to decision making. This is in particular for rental properties, and we want to make sure that we are implementing that. And so I just want folks to know, thank you to legislative leaders, that money is in the budget. And you know, our housing leaders, you know them all, from the pro tem to Scott, all of. I mean, I'm not doing justice to so many members of the legislature that have been champions in this space. Thank you for that hard work. Here's the investments we've made on homelessness. Just want to again contextualize. Got a lot more work to do here. We're just getting going. It's been a challenging year, but we're just getting going. We're mindful. We know exactly what to anticipate in the next year, 2, 3, as it relates to the dust settling on this pandemic and the impacts of this pandemic in terms of the prospects that we are going to be challenged with even more homelessness in this state. Now, we haven't been shy. We haven't been timid, and we haven't used the pandemic as an excuse not to move forward. $1.2 billion, $1.16 billion has been invested to cities and counties in our COCs just in the last 2 years. We did this in April, something called Project Room Key, in April of this, I mean, just a few months ago. We were able to get 23,000 people support homeless individuals. It's unprecedented in California's history. I know 23,000 is not 123,000, but it was significant. And we still have close to 15,000 units of room key housing in our portfolio, at least the portfolios of cities and counties all up and down the state. We created a new program in June, really got up and running in July, August, September, October, just in 5-6 months, called Project, we'll refer to, it's really Home Key, Project Room Key, Home Key. And we invested with the incredible support of the legislature, incredible support. I went above and beyond, providing these grants, $846 million awarded. We got those dollars out in just a few months. We got all these 94 projects in escrow in less than 6 months, 51 jurisdictions, and over 6,000 permanent new housing units that would have otherwise not existed had we not gotten creative, working with our federal government, which provided 75% of the support in terms of those investments for this program. We also were able to match some philanthropic support because good ideas generate support, and I just want to thank philanthropy for their recognition of that program as well. And because it worked, we might as well double down on it. And that's what we're proposing to do, new investments, $1.75 billion in new investments in housing to address the homeless crisis. $1.75 billion in new investments to purchase more hotels and motels, to build on what we did last year, to focus on mental health housing. We must provide and develop more community mental health housing, physical brick and mortar infrastructure. It's missing. It's been missing for decades. Let's use this money to make that investment, and let's invest and dedicate our investments in our vulnerable seniors. Came out of Master Plan for Aging, comes out of just common sense, and it's just self-evident. Any of us watching, any of us seeing, experiencing what's happening in this country, not just the state, disproportionate now number of seniors we're starting to see, or at least large number of seniors we're starting to see on our streets and sidewalks. And so we need to do more in that space. $1.75 billion we're recommending for the legislature to consider. And yes, we're bringing back CalAIM. Talked a lot about this last year. This was unfortunately impacted our investments into complete transformation of our Medi-Cal system. Our Medicaid nationwide, it's Medi-Cal here in the state of California. We want to invest $1.1 billion, that's all in, not just general fund, in this CalAIM proposal. As my dad used to love to say, God's delays are not God's denials. While this may have been delayed last year, we're committed to the cause this year. This is about payment reform, changing incentives, investing in prevention, looking at brain health and physical health, looking at the integration. It's basically statewide whole person care, that old waiver that we had for pilots, whole person care, to address the whole person, not just pieces of people, and waste money in a fragmented system, to incorporate that statewide It's a really exciting initiative. It's enlivening for at least those that seek to have the gift of being in these positions, to do that. This is part of the why. Why do you want to be in these positions? This is a big part of my why. And I know it's a big part of Dr. Galley and my entire healthcare team's why. This is exciting, and there's so many wonderful, Dr. Wood and so many members of the legislature, there's so many wonderful leaders in this space that Ramla help amplify these efforts, and I just want to thank them for their work on this and their commitment to it. Let's talk about work. We got to commit to doing more to help our kids and their health needs. I remind folks that the brain is part of the body, and so we need to address the issue of brain health and physical health. And the issue of early screening is foundational at prevention, but creating a greater, stronger school-based model of care for behavioral health is fundamental. Wellness, early prevention, suicide prevention. God bless. Suicide prevention. So $400 million, that's all in, 200 general fund, 200 million matched the Fed's commitment in that space. $200+ million, there's an old 2006 bond that was passed. A lot of the money was spent, but a lot of the money was relinquished. A lot of the money came back. We can use it with discretion on this jails facilities bond. Kind of like this, at least the frame. Jail facilities bond, money is available. We could put $200 million, and we can use that money for residential mental health facilities. So building on that $1.75 billion and some of the resources there, an additional $200 million here to provide resources. So repurposing of this is something we are proposing to the legislature. And then we got to deal with this issues of incompetent to stand. And this tough stuff. It's part of our state hospital system. We've had 3 pilots, these demonstration projects. We want to scale them. That's why you see that reference of $233 million of the $304.5. But we have to deal with ISTs. We want to look at Fairview. We have a lot of proposals in this space. We have a comprehensive proposal in this space. A lot of work to do in this space. But this is foundational. It's principled. And yes, there's a legal requirement to do the right thing as well. We should have needed that. But we are committing to a long-term process of investing in the IST space. Speaking of investments, Hunter, another $500 million. This is substance abuse as well as mental health that we do anticipate coming in the space from the federal government. So again, legislature, really look forward to working with you on these resources. It can be supplementary, it could be additive. We'll work together. We'll figure that out. Now let's talk about healthcare. So we move from mental health more broadly to physical, not just mental health. Here's a lot of work we've done. That individual mandate, this expansion and the deepening of those subsidies into the middle class. No other state in America does that. Into the middle class, supporting subsidies for our public option. We provided eligibility for everyone regardless their status up to 26. We created this commission, the notion of changing our payer system, and I've long believed in a single payer model. I just believe ultimately that's where this country is going to go. It's a question of how you get there. So we really need to answer all those tough questions, because really at the end of the day, there are only tough questions in this space. And so we created this commission. It was created a few years ago, but we've actually got people now working on this question with real resources to back up their contribution and their efforts. Prop 56, we started investing money there, wasn't previously invested, loan repayment programs and the like. We've talked a lot about reducing costs, lowering prescription drug costs, talked about more cost targets, transparency, consequences for failing to meet targets, and how we can do more to expand eligibility and deepen subsidies. So here's what we're proposing this year. Last year we talked about this Office of Healthcare quality and affordability. This year we're going to get it done. This fundamentally is an office that will address that provider consolidation issue. We'll address some of the regional disparities on why in Northern California versus Southern California the cost structures are so different. There's no excuse for that. We have to address those head on, to be forthright about that, and we've got to target costs in all sectors, and hold folks to account. More transparency. It's tough. No one says this is easy. In this office, it's about the umbrella to begin that process anew. We also, as part of our master plan for aging, thank you to all the leaders that just put that master plan out, creation of this Office of Medicare Innovation and Integration. This is all about some of the wobbler issues of Medicaid, Medicare. This is all about the integration more broadly and looking at keeping people on home, keeping supports. The whole idea is allow people to live in place, live in dignity, address transportation needs, support their long-term care by being innovative. So it's not just skilled nursing facilities, it's not just these larger constructs that we have inherited from an industrial mindset, but some of these new supports that are part and parcel of a more flexible, innovative, community-based, culturally competent strategy. So that's broadly what that Medicare Innovation and Integration Office will do. But more important than anything else, its capacity to do something big now presents itself with the Biden administration coming in. So we're really, really excited about the creation of both of these offices moving forward. We also are committed to the cause of acknowledging what's worked. Telehealth has really worked. Been amazing. We did some immediate executive orders, codified trailer bills, legislation. A lot of good work was done. Legislative leaders across the spectrum on telehealth. We want to put an additional $94.8 million into maintaining our expanded flexibilities that were authorized during this pandemic into telehealth, remote patient monitoring as a new benefit specifically. Look, for adults with type 1 diabetes, no more important benefit than this continuous glucose monitoring. It has not been an expanded Medi-Cal benefit. Now it will be, again, if the legislature concurs. And then there's that $1.4 billion. You may recall those suspensions in the budget may have been on your mind. A few of you that may be familiar with it. We suspended, again, back to those trigger cuts, deferrals, suspensions to balance last year's budget. Prop 56 supplemental payments, IHSS, in-home supported services. Doug, that suspension's gone. To April Barrett, gone. We finally are addressing those issues. Thank you guys, both of you, for your strong advocacy and support. That's at 7%. We're going to get that moving again. Developmental service rates, so many, so many, I think I can go through the list. I was thinking of Fraser and others, been incredible leaders in developmental services. Thank you for your support and leadership in that space. Those suspensions are off, $1.4 billion. Impact to the general fund, but we are in a position where we can afford to do that. The master plan for aging, I talked about all the things that are in other parts of the budget. We're just doing some direct supports, and also former First Lady Maria Shriver and her work on Alzheimer's. She talked about the importance of a new senior advisor position. We're going to do that. Talked about these blue zone community grants. We're going to begin to seed those grants. More data sharing, more systems connectivity, more research, media awareness, all of that part of a package for the master plan for aging and homelessness. Speaking of a package, comprehensive $1 billion commitment to wildfire resiliency and emergency response. $1 billion package. We're going to provide this. It's always among the first questions. Does that mean more firefighters? Yes. At least 30 more crews, 15 members per crew, $143 million. Continue our investment in C-130s, these large air tankers, better suppression technology, night capacity, faster, safer Black Hawk helicopters, replace those old Hueys, $48 million. New LIDAR, we delayed that last year. It's around remote sensoring and LIDAR to really start mapping with more sophistication, specificity, our remote monitoring, but really start pre-positioning with more understanding, more nuance, using technology to really map and research our fire-prone areas in the state. And then, yes, maybe it's just because I'm fifth-generation San Franciscan, earthquake early warning system. Please be mindful. We live in the state of California. It is spectacular for a reason, at least topographically, geographically. Mother Nature will remind us of that. And so we need to be prepared and mindful that because of technology, we may learn a few seconds, hopefully 10, 20, 30 seconds before the direct impacts through this early warning system. I don't know of another system like it, at least in the United States. Japan, others have some interesting systems, but we're proud of that. We're going to put an additional $17.3 million in investment in that space. Cap and trade. Last year, we weren't able to do what we wanted to do in cap and trade because of the contraction. This year, we're able to do a lot more. We had some good August auctions. I think it was $474 million. We had a good November auction. I think over $584 million, don't quote me, but roughly that was the auction receipts. So we're in a position, one $0.4 billion investment now into cap and trade. We're going to accelerate our efforts. I don't know if you saw what China's doing on electric vehicles. I mean, this is where the world is going. You want to be big, you got to be big in big things. Nothing bigger than low carbon green growth. Nothing more impactful, nothing more meaningful from an economic paradigm and inclusion paradigm than changing the way we produce and consume energy by investing in the future and making sure we're dominant, not just nationwide, competitively so, but worldwide. And that's why we want to accelerate our efforts to alternative fuel vehicles. And that's what we are proposing as part of our larger climate action agenda. And remember, this is a climate move, not just an economic move, because at the end of the day, it's about health, it's about asthma, it's about dirty air, not just about climate broadly. It's also very personal. It's about equity. But more importantly, it's about accelerating that pace of investment to the future. And so we want to accelerate our ZEV infrastructure investments with a securitization strategy. We want equity to be a principle of this effort. We don't leave people behind. It's not just about expensive, fancy cars and the rest of us are left behind. That's the Clean Cars for All program, about $495 million one space, or 400 plus million in that space across the board on the equity side, $1 billion plus in the infrastructure side. Climate innovation, we want to, I referenced this a moment ago, want to create some sales tax exclusions on the manufacturing side to promote alternative energy and investments in alternative transportation as well. So that's just a jump start to be more competitive in that space, $100 million. $300 million we want to put up in environmental justice, new dollars, toxic cleanups. It's not just Exide. Exide is a priority. You can see that reflected here. An additional, separate from the 300, additional $50 million, close to $50 million in that space. But we need to invest in more energy to address all of these other sites up and down. How many other Exides do we have? And we need to start put money up. We need to start investing. 300 million is a drop in the bucket. I'm not naive, but it's a start to begin to investigate these highly contaminated properties, prioritize from a health perspective those investments. Sustainable agriculture, $385 million we're proposing. So proud of our agricultural community, so proud to live in an agricultural state. It's pride, so much envy around the world. We can't lose sight of the incredible farmers and ranchers that we have in this state, but we also can't lose sight of the burdens that are being placed on them, stacking of all these rules and regulations, and in particular as we transition to low carbon green growth, as we decarbonize our economy, we need to be there and be more supportive in terms of equipment replacement, $250 million, climate smart loans for efficiency, more soils management. My wife, again here, in terms of regenerative strategies, soil management, so fundamental to our efforts. We're putting real money in this space. Sigma, that remarkable work that was done before we got here on Sigma. We need to provide some support and grants. It's $100 million to help with Sigma, our Sustainable Groundwater Management Program, which now is in place. And then obviously direct assistance to small farmers, mid-sized farmers. We want to put money in that space. And then something we've been working on for months, may not seem like a lot, could be a big deal. I don't want to overpromise, but a unified licensing portal to streamline regulations and reporting across the spectrum for agriculture. That's long overdue. We actually have a proposal plan, and that's why we're putting that dollar figure up to invest in it. And as always, more investment in integrated pest management, issues related to reducing harmful overuse of pesticides in this state. And so we want to support the transition. We want to be punitive to bad actors that are flagrant, but we also are mindful in that transition of the work we have to do to help support that. And there's resources in that space. And by the way, speaking of resources, $600 million of federal money for farmers and ranchers as well. We'll work with the legislature to look forward. Melissa Hurtado, so many others already now reaching out. How can we wisely make these investments? Speaking of agriculture, we just have a few more slides. Important, we consider food insecurity. Last year, in addition to our baseline budget we passed on supporting our food banks and tribes and our food programs, we did two significant enhancements, a $75 million enhancement And then in October, an additional $90 million. That just started going out, that $90 million enhancement to our food bank and tribes. So this is on top of that additional $30 million. This California Assistance Program, which helps refugees, legal immigrants, $11.4 million. And again, she's in the front row, farm to school investment. My wife, Kat Taylor, so many others, nonprofit, leveraging these resources, making sure we're investing in healthier, more nutritious food for our kids across the spectrum and supporting ag in that process. So it's more of a catalyst fund, not substituting other work, but really encouraging smarter investments in our public schools. We want also, speaking of smart investments, to continue to improve government efficiency, not just rhetorically, but substantively, and then address the issue of bringing services in the state into the digital age. I wish I could just go like this, and DMV's upgraded, EDD's upgraded, name it. Care, the whole system. We've inherited stuff going back to the 70s. I wrote a book about being on the leading and cutting edge of 1976 in terms of our IT. And trust me, that's been made abundantly clear to not just me, to all of you in this last year. So we have a lot of work to do to bring government into the digital age. Just brief, few slides on that. Got $50 million in cybersecurity. We're doing cybersecurity audits across the spectrum, every single state department. By the way, you may recall last year we invested, it wasn't created, but it wasn't funded. Last year we funded our Cybersecurity Integration Center. And just in time with some of the revelations of what occurred federally, of which we were not immune as a state to its impact. So cybersecurity is still top of mind. We want additional investment in that space. That Office of Digital Innovation we created, got some wonderful talent now assembled there. We want them to start sprinting in terms of their work, looking at more consumer-based services, consumer-based interfaces, meeting people where they are, meaning taking government services, not just online, but getting in people's hands, in their devices, meeting people where they are, from search to suggest, reminder, prompts, all kinds of new strategies, new ways of thinking about technology. And then on the relates to the state workforce, we want to make those 5% across-the-board cuts permanent. We are consolidating office space, leased space. We are making investments with a mindfulness around these new work styles that I talked about, and telework, more online services, and the like. I close with this slide, and that is a slide that is very similar to how I began, and that is, here is the $5.046 billion that we are asking humbly for consideration for immediate action by the California legislature. $2 billion to reopen our schools safely for in-person instruction, to invest that $575 million in those $5,000 to $25,000 grants for small businesses as well as nonprofits, fee waivers for those tens of thousands of restaurants and bars and barbershops and manicurists that have been struggling, and of course, $2.4 billion direct $600 payments in the pockets. You get it out in just weeks. 4 million people get the benefit of that program if we move quickly and then address in real time how to appropriately distribute that $2.6 billion from the federal government as it relates to federal funds for rental support, not just for renters, but also for small landlords that are also the beneficiary of that resource, as well as address immediately this eviction moratorium question, which impacts not just tenants, you and I, but also commercial tenants, businesses, LLCs, S-corps, and the like, that are also vulnerable in this environment as well. Just one final interesting tidbit. I know a few of you will be interested in this. It does look like we're going to actually exceed that GAN limit. This is for insiders. Governor Brown may remember this. 1979, GAN limit was imposed. You may remember, he may not be happy I even reminded him of this, but you need to be reminded of the GAN limit, because who would have thought, just for the second time, I think it was 1986, confirm that, I think it was 1986, the last time that the GAN limit was exceeded. We project it will be exceeded by about $102 million. Just a projection. We're going to know more. The answer to your question is What does that mean? You know what it means, some of you, that money has to be given back to taxpayers, 50% back to schools. But this is projected. We're really not going to know exactly what the dollar figure is until the May revise. And so in May, we'll have more clarity on whether, in fact, we did pass that GAN limit. So that's the broad strokes presentation. I've never promoted being succinct in these budget presentations. Certainly, that was example in the last 2 prior budget presentations. I personally take pride in getting into the details of budgets. I think it's foundational. I think it's fundamental in terms of the work of governing. We talk in terms often rhetorical, but for me it's not rhetorical. Budgets being reflections of our values, while we use those value slides on multiple occasions in terms of this presentation. Always mindful of those most in need, always framing our considerations around broad-based economic recovery, equity, and inclusion. We're all better off when we're all better off. That's the foundation. Those are the principles, and that is the proposed budget that we are formally submitting to the legislature. With pride and expectation in our partnership, we look forward to working collaboratively over the next weeks and months, working on the immediate package, some additional early action, and ultimately landing on a budget that will do justice to the state and make us proud. We are in a much better fiscal footing than anyone could have imagined, even a few months ago. Let us be wise and thoughtful about how we make these investments. In closing, always mindful that our forecast in terms of the future is very, very, very tenuous on the basis of all the macroeconomic headwinds, on the basis of this recent surge with COVID-19 and the realities of uncertainty that mark this moment, not just in American history, but world history. So prudence, fiscal discipline, maintaining those frameworks, that parameter of thinking as we begin to invest in our growth engines is, I think, what this moment calls for. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Governor. This is Adam Beam with the Associated Press. I wanted to ask you about the $4.6 billion that you are proposing for school districts to potentially use for things like summer school. I just wanted to ask, what do you expect the districts to do with this money? Do you expect them to adjust their school calendars into the summer or adopt a year-round school? And do you have buy-in from the districts and the teachers to do something like that?
Well, we've been talking a lot to the districts. We've been talking a lot to the teachers. We're going to be meeting on Monday with 7 large urban district superintendents to talk more about some of their concerns. I think substantially a lot of their concerns are addressed very directly in this budget, directly addressed with that $4.6 billion in appropriation. But providing flexibility, providing the ability to address not just learning loss, but to extend the time that we are educating our kids is foundational. You can see, I'll bring back that slide. You can see again, we just referenced 2 things, and this is to your question, Adam. Summer school, before and after school programs, but extending that school year is in essence what summer school begins to do. Extending the hours is really the kind of flexibility that we are providing with these resources, and we want, because of the way we've framed, the way we've organized our system of education, we want localism to ultimately be determinative in terms of what works for them, to supplement those educational supports, how to do that, when to do that. We want to provide the flexibility that's reflected in this additional $4.6 billion of extended learning money. And so we look forward to the creativity that comes back from LEAs, but certainly we will work with the legislature to clarify our expectation. We look forward to working, not just Tony Thurmond, and thank you to the Superintendent of Public Education for his input on this proposal, and many, many others, but we look forward to engaging O'Donnell, others, the legislature that have also been invaluable in helping promote something along these lines.
Is that your goal, to encourage districts to adopt some type of year-round type calendar program?
My goal is to address the issue of learning loss, to address the issue on those disproportionately impacted English learners, foster kids, homeless kids, people with special needs, kids with special needs, young kids. What we hope to do with this money is address these inequities, to address the realities that distance learning has not met everybody's needs equally. And that's exactly what this is intended to do. We want to provide flexibility because one size does not fit all. Different cohorts, different populations, different dynamics, different governance, different leadership. We want to provide that flexibility, but we've got to invest in more time and attention to those most at need. And that's fundamentally what that $4.6 billion represents.
Thank you, Governor. This is Laurel Rosenhall with Cal Matters. I also have a question about schools reopening. You referenced the concerns raised by the urban school district superintendents. They said that your plan, allows local teacher unions an effective veto on reopening because it encourages schools to reopen, but doesn't compel them to do so even when public health circumstances show that it could be safe. So I'm just wondering if you would be open to a plan that requires schools to reopen in person when it is safe, or if you're committed to allowing local teacher unions to, decide whether that can happen.
Well, I don't frame it along the way you framed it, or frankly was framed in that letter. We are working with those superintendents. We look forward to engaging them formally on Monday. I think substantially this budget reflects the vast majority of their concerns that were highlighted in that letter. Concerns around equity, that's demonstrable in terms of the budget we've just put out, the historic funding that we have put out, the additional supports coming from the federal government that will only further the cause of addressing equity. We have as default, you got to opt out. It's not an opt-in now. We flip that frame in terms of at the beginning, focusing TK to 2, and then building on subsequent cohorts. We've had robust and energetic conversations, not only with teachers unions, but represented bargaining units across the spectrum. And we will continue to engage them and support local superintendents in that effort. But one thing I know, and forgive me, I know it's stale, it's rote, and I've repeated it on multiple occasions, but I think it's important to repeat in this context. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I do believe fundamentally that if we're going to successfully educate our most vulnerable kids, if we're going to be successful in addressing learning loss, if we're going to be successful as a state, we have to do it in partnership with. And so this notion of imposition, closed fist versus an open hand is a distinction for me that's important. And that distinction is reflected in providing incentives for the kind of behavior we want to see. And we share, I believe, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to each and every one of those superintendents. We share the same goal for safe reopening for in-person education. But our approach is not to do it top down and mandate. It's to have a collaborative framework with real incentives that allow for resource allocation to occur when people are committed to promoting the cause of in-person instruction.
Where there are school districts where such collaboration has not proven to be the reality, do you see a role for the state to take a heavier-handed approach and make that collaboration happen in a way that it hasn't so far in the largest school districts that serve the most children in the state? That's why we put out on Tuesday, trailer bill language, Thursday, yesterday, additional language. Next Tuesday, we'll put out even more language. The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Thank you.
Hi, Governor. Sophia Bolag here from the Sacramento Bee. This budget, like all Californian budgets, is really dependent on tax revenue from the state's highest earners, as you are well aware. And so I'm wondering, what are you doing or what are you planning to do to keep the next Elon Musk or another California billionaire from leaving the state?
Well, we're so proud of DoorDash and their IPO. We're so proud of Airbnb and their IPO. So proud of what Salesforce did in terms of making an investment in another California-based company, one of the largest proposed mergers in America. All of that energy is happening still here in the state of California. We're really proud. Once again, Bloomberg came out with their Entrepreneurial Innovation Index, California dominating once again in that space this year. We're so proud of the fundamentals in the state, all the talent that we convey from our university system, the research and development, more Nobel laureates, more venture capital than any other part of the globe, not just the rest of the country. So many of our private sector companies, the fastest growing private sector companies, dominantly are still here in the state of California. So an individual leaves, so many individuals come to this state. And so we're proud of that. We're going to maintain our competitiveness. We're going to make a case for this state. 12 months ago, the biggest complaint we were having in the state was stress and gentrification. Cities like San Francisco, because too many people wanted to descend. And so the fundamentals haven't really changed. The state is still this remarkable home to more dreamers and doers than any other part of the globe. So we're going to build on what's working. We're going to acknowledge what's not. But one thing I also want to acknowledge, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's folks that are purposely misinforming the public about things that aren't happening in this state, particularly as it relates to taxes and other things. And I think we have a lot of work to do to clear up that record. And we can assure you, I can assure you personally, not just professionally, in terms of the work we're doing, that we are being laser focused on that and have worked hard over the course of the last many months to make sure people know what we're doing, to make sure that they know that they matter and that we care. And we are building those supports not just at GoBiz, but across the spectrum of state agencies. And I hope you see that reflected substantively here today with the billions and billions of dollars of economic and workforce support and the streamlining that we're hoping to do within industries to help accommodate our job creators and create conditions where they can flourish and thrive.
I mean, specifically when you talk about, making sure that people know what you're doing, you just mentioned some of the budget investments that you've outlined. What else would you point to in this budget or in your policy agenda for this year that you think is going to help continue to make California a place where people want to come and stay?
Well, the investments, $786 million right here in investments. Put this slide up, perhaps the most meaningful, $786 million investments in CSU UC. You want to know what the differentiator is in this state? Again, I'll repeat it. It's not only the conveyor belt for talent, UC, CSU, and community college, but it's also our research institutions. It's also these incredible universities, private as well, Stanford University, USC, incredible labs, Lawrence Livermore, Lawrence Berkeley Labs, Sandia Labs, Scripps. Those are the economic engines, ultimately, of human capital, the birthplace of life science and biotech, 1979, interestingly, 1979, GAN limit was established. We also were the birthplace of biotech and bioinnovation. So you build on those strengths. We also have put out, and I'll go to the slides, billions and billions of dollars of additional supports. The Cal Competes grants go directly to your question. We've never provided this level of new support in some time. The Main Street hiring tax credits, the loan guarantees, fee waivers across the spectrum, grants to help the ecosystem of job creation, job growth, housing investments go directly to your question. The investment in addressing quality of life, homelessness, the investments in schools, not just higher education. The issue of K through 12 investments, early child education substantively addresses your question. Childcare addresses it. Forgive me, I'm here not to provide a tweet 144-character response, but a comprehensive response that's not just about tax credits, not just about traditional metrics to which some people see the world, but more comprehensively about creating an ecosystem, creating a climate for entrepreneurialism, something I know a lot about. I'll remind you, I'll remind everybody, I didn't start in politics. I started in the private sector. I took pen to paper out of college and got 13 people to invest in an idea. And I grew that business to 20 plus businesses across the state. No trust funds in my family. Didn't inherit anything. Wasn't a family business. It was an idea. I took pen to paper. So when it comes to the issue of entrepreneurialism, when it comes to the issue of small businesses, when it comes to the issue of risk taking, I'm the beneficiary of this state and all that it's provided. There's no state on planet Earth that I'd rather do business in than the state of California. I'm proud of this state. If you're looking just for the cheapest place to be, that's not the game that separates our game from gameplay elsewhere. But if you're looking for an ecosystem, there's no other state in the world that is further along than this state. We'll acknowledge the areas of stress. We have to. I think I just did in terms of the preamble, in terms of these budget supports and the need to do more. But I'm also very, very mindful and proud of what this state has to offer that no other state in our union has to offer. And so while you identify one or two people that one went to Hawaii or so, it's wonderful. I think that's what life's all about. But so many people coming to the state as well, and so many people that just in the last few weeks have doubled down. Brian Chesky said, no place else would Airbnb be possible. Talk about all the new billionaires that were created. You talk about the voluntary tax. How about all those new billionaires were created just in the last few weeks? Why don't we highlight that as well? Because of someone taking an idea, living on a mattress. There was no availability in a convention center at San Francisco Convention Center, and comes up with an idea to rent the mattress. That only happens in California. Happened in San Francisco. And that IPO has created tens of thousands of jobs. And what did he say? He said, I'm doubling down on California. Head of DoorDash, doubling down on California. Salesforce, one of the most dynamic software anywhere in the world. I mean, I thought the cloud was in the sky until they came along. It's a byproduct of Oracle. Now it's one of the fastest growing software in the world. Look at the investments Mark Benioff is making in this state and how committed he is in the state. I'm just proud of all that. And, but I'm mindful of some of the headlines. But boy, this budget reflects this state's doing pretty damn well. And we got a lot of work to do to help small, medium-sized businesses. But the folks at the top doing pretty damn well. But I don't begrudge that success. I admire and respect it. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of a competitive landscape. And I am acknowledging that. And I'm committed as governor to being more aggressive in the future to make a case anew for this great state.
Angela Hart, Kaiser Health News. Thank you, Governor. I have 2 questions for you, and I'm happy to repeat them if I need to. My first is about the expansion, the long hoped for expansion of Medi-Cal to undocumented seniors. You have previously given commitments to fund this, and it's not in the budget this year, so I'd like you to please explain that. And then my second question really is I think the question that's on a lot of people's minds. Local health departments have immense and growing responsibility. California and you have given them immense responsibility during the pandemic, and they're on the front lines and really steering California's pandemic response. And local health departments and public health leaders say the existing funding formula is nowhere near enough to really adequately control this virus and do what they need to do. So my question for you on the local health money, which is not included in the budget for public health agencies, is are local public health agencies not a big enough priority in the middle of the pandemic for you? Thank you.
This slide, let me take a moment, put up a slide that I think can answer the first part of your question. I'm very mindful of the last question and in the context of your question, the reality that's presented in the slide that we have now put up, that while we are enjoying the fruits of a lot of one-time energy and surplus, that it's not permanent. And we have to be mindful of over-committing $3+ billion a year, specific to your question, in the out years and exacerbating some of the structural challenges that we still have to face going forward. So we need to make sure that we're mindful, put our house in order, strong fiscal foundation. I have not been shy, quite the contrary, in terms of expanding healthcare investment and healthcare coverage, put it up against any governor in America. I'm also not shy about acknowledging we have a lot more work to do. And I believe in universal coverage. And you're correct that last year, in that beginning presentation today, when we were in an environment, it's very different than the environment we're in today, that we wanted to make that commitment and engage in a phased approach to advancing that cause. Right now, with all the other roles and responsibilities that we have in terms of being caregivers, in terms of supporting those in an equitable manner in our public education system, address the issue of poverty and homelessness across spectrums, these are just choices, and we look forward to engaging the legislature and furthering that dialogue and that discussion. You know where my heart is, you know where my head is, but right now the resources are scarce when you move forward, and I'm mindful of that until we have some more clarity. So we hope to architect, we got to 26, we hope to architect something working with the legislature, and I look forward to that engagement. And I know there's some incredible advocates, and Senator Durazo and others, so many. I think all of us share, vast majority of us at least, the goal of universal health care. Now, as it relates to supporting health and health care, we care deeply about that investment, care deeply about that commitment. It's demonstrable in the health care investments we've made. And as it relates to this pandemic, the health care investments that we promoted as well in this presentation and are promoting in the budget that we're submitting to the legislature. It's interesting, as of this morning, we also providing resources that are not necessarily on the balance sheet and aren't reflected necessarily in a budget. 1,748 individual staff members now have been deployed to help our local health departments, a demonstrable example of our commitment to support our local health departments. 360 DOD personnel. We're asking for an additional 500 more, state as well as federal support. We are providing resources across the spectrum in terms of the federal dollars that are going to be going out and supporting subsequent efforts on contact tracing. You saw the numbers. Testing, vaccinations, all the other supports in terms of isolation, quarantine. You saw that package of supports. All of that supporting the local health officer infrastructure. So we are committed to that cause, committed to those partnerships, committed to addressing, the spirit of your question, the stresses that are placed upon those local health officers in the midst of this pandemic, particularly our hospitals, and notably in 2 or 3 parts of the state.
Governor.
And then with an impeachment, it's just, you know what, even if they impeach, you know, even if the technical tag of impeachment is after he's out of office, if that's what they want, okay, but the other side of that coin is how much is that going to cost and what's it really going to do? Right. But how
budget proposal, and we will work with the legislature on filling in the blanks through what you know well, and others may not be familiar with, called a trailer bill. In the trailer bill, we'll lay out nuance and detail. As it relates to vaccinations, we have a comprehensive vaccination plan. I want to go specifically to your point of concern, or at least reflected consideration and concern. As it relates to the vaccination protocols and processes, you may recall a number of months ago, we created a scientific safety review group whose goal, in fact, on October 19th, they stood up 16 members, because it includes members from outside the state of California. Their goal was to look at the safety and the efficacy of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. We created another committee called the Guidelines Working Group that is made up of 16 people with expertise in terms of vaccinations. They have been working very, very publicly and collaboratively with a third group of 60 members, a community advisory committee. They meet consistently. They just met on Wednesday, and they had a public discussion to lay out in detail our vaccination strategy. So I want to make it crystal clear. in a very transparent way, we have laid out a vaccination blueprint, and we update it and iterate it on a consistent basis. Proof point, just yesterday, we updated our guidelines related to vaccinations. I'll go to a slide here in a brief moment so everybody can familiarize themselves with what we put out yesterday so we can answer the specific question around planning in terms of the utilization of vaccinations. As you recall, the first phase for vaccinations is phase 1A. It's about 3 million people. That prioritizes healthcare workers and residents in long-term congregate settings, not just skilled nursing facilities, but residential care facilities and assisted living facilities. We recognize some of the bottlenecks. It's not unique to California, quite the contrary, talking to governors all across the country. Some of the bottlenecks in terms of the prioritization, a lot of that through the spirit of the CDC and the guidelines they put forth, but certainly that we put out with our guidelines working group. So we laid out a strategy. Within each phase, there's 3 tiers. I'm not offering those tiers for you today, but they're available on our covid19.ca.gov website, specific tiers, specific vaccination strategy. What we did yesterday is we updated the guidelines recognizing some of the bottlenecks in terms of this cohort, and now we are allowing people more flexibility at the local level, county level, but also providers across the spectrum, more flexibility in terms of moving between tiers. This is tier 1 and 2 of the next phase, which that flexibility allows us to go into different cohorts, different ages within different sectors of our economy. So we're loosening this up. We have a specific goal of 1 million vaccinations within the next 10 days that we want to administer, and that's part of our vaccination plan. Now, money that we have in the existing budget, we are halfway through the fiscal year, existing budget, a lot of that came from the original CARES Act. We're using those resources right now to advance this cause, to support our county hospitals, or rather support our county local health offices, and to support those that are partnering with us in this endeavor. A lot of money went directly to the counties, LA County notably, not just to the state. We also partnered with Walgreens, and we've partnered with CVS. Walgreens and CVS, as part of our vaccination plan, are distributing vaccinations in our skilled nursing facilities, in our other congregate settings. So that's all part and parcel of the broader vaccination plan. This new money that we'll put up will help support those existing efforts, help amplify areas, in this case, which need to be amplified, and that is culturally competent, peer-to-peer engagement to encourage communities that have historically, and for good reason, felt reticent to take vaccines, to begin to have those vaccines more safely administered. We want to do more PSAs. We want more partnerships with CBOs. That is part of the work we're doing in real time with the legislative support. In fact, we had a number of legislators on yesterday, a Zoom call, talking about some of these efforts as a preview to this year's budget. They'll all be part and parcel of our trailer bill.
So if I could just follow up quickly, Governor. So I think what part that I hear you saying is that some of this is to be determined. 372 million feels like a very specific number, so I thought there might be more detailed plans on that. But as a part of this too, who ultimately is accountable in California for the vaccine distribution? If it goes well, if it doesn't go well, who does the public hold accountable?
Well, they always hold the governor accountable regardless. And so you will, others will, when in doubt. Things go well, they'll celebrate the success of all the local partners. It's part and parcel of any role of responsibility. I'm used to it. Being an entrepreneur, at the end of the day, buck stops with the person that had the privilege of signing the paychecks as mayor and certainly as governor. So I recognize that role and responsibility. It's interesting. It's not just an interesting point. I think there's a sense that the governors have somehow received vaccines, and then the governors decide where the vaccines go. The state of California has not received 1 dose of vaccines. The state didn't receive any. The state was a conduit through these advisory committees of where the vaccines go. And it goes to local partners well established. I'll remind folks who may not be familiar, every year the state of California distributes roughly 19 million doses of the flu vaccine. We have a well-established criteria for distribution. Only 10% of those vaccines are actually administered through the county, 90% through a network of providers. So it's through that network of providers that we're looking to distribute the vaccine. Now, this is a state that's larger than 21 states combined. I wish in many respects I, was just managing a small city. The challenge is how one holds accountable all these levers and all these levels of government, all these clinics, partners, health, all the whole spectrum. And therein lies the challenge in application and implementation. And so we're working through all of that. We had a wonderful call yesterday with, panoply of leaders, business leaders, labor leaders, local, state leaders, folks at Planned Parenthood, community clinics across the spectrum, hospitals, and the like, as well as dental association, medical association, legislative leaders, trying to work through all of these nuances and details. We socialized the $372 million. And by the way, Keely will get up, and I recognize you want the actual $372 million. Keely will come up in a moment on the budget, talk about broad strokes, what that trailer bill will actually look like, because there is a framework, and that is a specific number based upon the framework of building supports based on existing plans. But what I give you is a preview of a framework that we're working off of broadly where those dollars will be distributed. And so we'll work with these partners, have a lot of work to do. And, but at the end of the day, Governor takes responsibility for whatever anyone wants to put on his or her plate, and I happily accept it.
Hi, Governor. Nicole Nixon with CAP Radio. Your budget proposal notes several times the need for additional federal pandemic relief. I want to know what you would like to see specifically from the federal government here. How optimistic are you about getting this, especially now that Democrats control the Senate? And how urgent is another coronavirus relief bill in your mind?
Well, we're blessed with the supports we did receive, and I highlighted those supports because I thought it was important to acknowledge what we are the beneficiary of. And by the way, what I didn't acknowledge, just interesting, about $18.6 billion is reflected in those stimulus checks that are coming from the feds into the state. We have billions more reflected in the PPP loans that will come into the state and other supports that were not part of the presentation. So we will be the beneficiary. We estimate, Keely, what, about $100 billion? Over $100 billion of supports that are coming into the state. One has to be forthright and acknowledge that up front. As it relates to your question specifically, I think the biggest disappointment was the support in particular to cities and counties. And as a former county mayor, as a former county supervisor, I am very, very mindful of the burdens and pressures, particularly as it relates to sales tax revenue, property tax revenue, that those cities and counties are facing. And so that would be an answer to your question. If there was any more urgent need in addition to what we've already received, it would be in that area.
Hi, Governor. Katie Orr, KQED News. Back on the vaccines, we've heard you talk about a lot of groups that are involved, a lot of committees. Is there a concern that maybe the state is spending too much time deciding who gets the vaccine and not focusing on actually getting the vaccines out to people? I mean, we know some states, they just have a broad category and people go get them. Also, when will people know it's their turn to get a vaccine, or how will they know it's their turn? Are you going to get a vaccine, and is the first partner going to be vaccinated?
Yeah, I made this clear in the past. I'll repeat it today, that we will accept the vaccine. I'll wait until my turn. And wherever we are in the age cohort and the vulnerability matrix that we've put out and socialized, that's where that date will fall. Now, look, as it relates to the prioritization of the vaccines, we do prioritize our healthcare workers. We want to vaccinate the vaccinators. I think that's foundational, and helping our seniors, particularly in congregate facilities, I think is wise, and I think that's the best approach. And that's underway. And we have been administering hundreds and hundreds, that more than any other state. Now, per capita, we have work to do, but more than any other state. As it relates to the comments I just made in relationship to the previous question, I think it's important that I once again show you this slide. We are allowing, and this goes directly to your question, we're allowing now flexibility based upon the health order we put out yesterday. Tomas Aragon, our health director, put out new guidelines yesterday based upon the input we've been receiving from all of our county partners in particular, but also our institutional partners across the spectrum, that they were looking for more flexibility. And this is the flexibility into phase 1B and different tiers that they're now being afforded. And so we want to provide more flexibility, more discretion, but within these broader parameters. We are going after, as it relates to enforcement, because I know there's been discussion for it, if people are monetizing vaccines, vaccines cost nothing. None of you will pay a penny for vaccines. You should not. Someone's charging, they shouldn't be charging. If someone's somehow monetizing the vaccines, or people, you know, some well-known, very rich person that's young and in great health, and, you know, she and he, the rest of their family, 50 folks, and want to have a big party, and they're all going to get a vaccination party, a flagrant violation by a private, we want to go after that. But people using common sense and saying, I'm low on my dose, you know, we're running out, I'm low, not on my dose, I have about extra 3 or 4 doses in this vial, and there's no one that showed up in line, or this person decided last minute not to take it. And then there's this, you know, 64-year-old senior who's there saying, well, by definition, we want to allow that flexibility. So common sense. Go after the flagrant, support common sense, and now formally, to your question, providing more flexibility between these phases.
A quick follow-up. I know you said you'd wait until your category comes up, but do you think maybe as the governor of California, one of like the largest states, that maybe you should get priority, ensure continuity of government?
My humble opinion is I don't think that will sit well with people, and I am happy to wait my turn.
Alex Michelson, Fox 11.
Please let me make this one work. Thank you, Governor. I have a big picture question about this year specifically. How do you balance the need for taxes, the need for revenue, with the real pain that people are feeling right now? I mean, how do you think about this in a way? Because there's some that may flee California or be frustrated with the business situation in this state, but then others that are clearly hurting so much right now.
Well, we're proposing no tax increases. We're balancing a budget. We have record reserves. We're using some of those reserves to pay down over the next few years $9.5 billion in pension obligations, the highest commitment in our state's history. We're being mindful of the one-time nature of a lot of the revenue windfall, and we're investing it in one-time purposes. We're investing $10 billion in infrastructure. We're investing in tax credits and tax supports, regulatory relief, regulatory reform. We're investing in housing and homelessness, unprecedented amount of money in public education, supporting our higher education partnerships, as well as investing in utilizing resources from this surplus to help support the most vulnerable Californians. Tripling of the earned income tax credit, the efforts over the last 18 months. Investments unprecedented in terms of getting money in the pockets of the most vulnerable Californians, $4 million with that $2.4 billion Golden State appropriation that we hope to advance. So I think we're finding that balance, at least that's what we're proposing, is a balanced approach consistent with our values, mindful of those stresses that you rightfully bring up in this year's budget. So that's, you know, this budget I hope is an answer subsequently to that question, but make no mistake, there are some that are talking about wealth taxes, some that are talking about big income taxes. They just don't, they're not part of the conversation. And so I hope people are mindful of that. I hope we can communicate that. And those that are promoting that, I hope they just learn about the facts. And we all, I think, are better off when we are beneficiaries of the truth and not people's agendas.
Hi, Governor Maribel Lopez, Univision 19, and my question is about the stimulus golden package. There are communities out there that they lack of information, they don't get enough information. They maybe understand that money is coming, help is coming, but they need more information. Do you plan to assign, besides the California Franchise Tax Board, more organizations that can help these people?
Well, the answer is yes. We have an amazing partnership called Listos. Listos has been established through the Office of Emergency Services. Listos has been central in our efforts to reach out to diverse communities across the spectrum in a very culturally competent way, bottom up, as it relates to our emergency management, wildfire mitigation, and recovery efforts. We are specifically now in this budget asking the legislature to approve additional supports for Listos to advance the effort to address socioeconomics and address the utilization of a similar framework for Listos to more broadly engage communities in terms of eligibility, in terms of information, across the spectrum of supports, accessing the I-10 under the EITC. And forgive me, I'll provide folks more information about that another time, to provide resources, or rather information about resources in our rapid resource program for mixed status families and for newcomers into the state of California and refugees, to provide information on our Housing to Harvest program, which is an incredible partnership with our farm workers, to provide more information, more supports in that space. Number two, in addition to Listos helping broaden that engagement and that support, we also have taken our lessons learned from our census. California put more money up, I think even on a justice per capita basis than probably any other state, at least most other states, to supplement our census efforts. Stubborn, difficult process. There was some success, there were some lessons learned. We're taking all of that and the construct of partnership that was established with community-based organizations, as well as state partners, individual actors, and we are now using those lessons and beginning to translate those efforts into more testing and more vaccination outreach efforts. So that's a second strategy in parallel with Listos to do, I think, exactly what you rightfully suggest is critical in a state as diverse as the state of California.
Talking now about COVID-19 and the same community, especially farm workers, they are not getting enough information. They go to work every day. Some of them, they get sick. Others live in fear of getting sick. And this is putting them in a position that some people are taking advantage of them. Talking with some organizations, they said that they go there every day and basically they live in a limbo.
Yeah, look, we have prioritized our farm workers in our second tier, which is our tier beyond healthcare workers and seniors in congregate facilities, as a top priority in terms of accessing the availability of the vaccines. Our community partnerships that I just framed as it relates to the census partners that were critical in working with farm worker community are now being utilized to help support not only in terms of accessing vaccines, getting additional port for testing, but also that Housing for Harvest program that I mentioned, which is specifically tailored for farm workers. We also have provided new rules and regulations, though we are now in a abeyance frame, but it's nonetheless important to note, with Cal OSHA to help support some of the gross violations of people that are abusing farm workers. And while we're not going to assess penalties as part of this abeyance of agreement that we're currently in, this interim agreement with the private sector, we are significantly increasing our outreach and engagement so that we can constructively bring people back in to enforcement. So there's a lot more support in this space for farm workers than have been in the past, including on the food side of the spectrum, where a big part of that last $90 million that we put in October for food banks and tribes also was targeted to help support our farm workers as well. I want to ask my team to provide you a comprehensive list. You'll see all kinds of other protections relates to sick leave and relates to issues of paid leave and issues related to workers' comp, all these other supports that we provided our farm workers as well. They'll get that to you immediately.
What about education for them? Because that they are lacking of education too. They are fear of maybe doing the test, maybe the vaccine when it's ready for them, because they don't know how that works.
Yeah. So big part of Don's question about where's the $372 million going to be used. We're going to build, I referenced this obliquely. Let me now take advantage of your question to express more specifically. A big part of our effort is to amplify our peer-to-peer engagement, to amplify our outreach, to amplify our partnerships with community-based organizations, trusted messengers. We did that, as you recall, directly with mixed status families and individuals that were here without documentation in the state of California a few months ago through an unprecedented effort to provide $125 million in direct supports to people regardless of their immigration status. And we built a framework of partnerships throughout the state of California with CBOs, with trusted messengers. So building off of that, we've got a whole new suite of outreach efforts. We just need to fund them at the next level. That will be part of the trailer bill, part of the spend plan of the $372 million on the vaccines. On Monday, you've just inspired me. On Monday, because I have them, I want to show you some new PSAs we're putting out, but I also want you to see not just how we're doing it in language. I'll also give you a little bit of backup to the packet of outreach that we'll be doing, the package that includes these trusted messengers, as it includes more specific outreach to our farm workers, not just in the Central Valley, the Central Coast, throughout the state of California, so you can see specifically, and maybe you guys can help promote as well in your network those PSAs and those partnerships as well, which could go a long way to help us.
Governor Carla Marinucci from Politico. You consistently describe California as America's next coming attraction, a place that's inventing the future, and yet California is not inventing the future when it comes to getting these vaccines out. It's in the bottom tier. You noted today different groups with experts, 100 experts and 3 tiers, et cetera, to help get this out. But what we hear from readers who want me to ask you, you have used your emergency powers as governor in the past, sometimes to criticism. If this isn't an emergency, what is? What is stopping you from doing that, from bringing in the National Guard or anything else you need to do? And specifically, what can you promise Californians when it comes to when they can get the vaccine and when they'll be notified? And then if I can add another question, do you support the call for impeachment or the invoking of the 25th Amendment that the House Speaker has asked for?
Let me just take that off the table. I'm focused on the distribution of vaccines, answering the first part of your question as a priority, and presenting a balanced budget to the legislature and engaging in these issues with priority and more focus. As it relates to the issue of the vaccinations, the goal is 1 million vaccines by the end of next week, specifically. The specific guidelines are presented in these slides. Let's bring back the slide so there's no ambiguity, no confusion. And I want to encourage people to go to the covid19.ca.gov website, covid19.ca.gov website, and learn more about where the prioritization is in terms of these vaccines. I'll remind people, we're in receipt of 2,050,000 doses as of last night. Those numbers change hourly and daily. We'll update the numbers tomorrow. So we have 2 million that we've received. We have 3 million people that are in that first cohort. Even if all 2 million doses were applied, it represents a de minimis number of Californians. There's simply no other doses that we have to distribute. That's frustrating for everybody. But I also think it's an important point to remind people of. If this nation, and by the way, California is not unique. If we're today at just shy of 30% distribution of the vaccines, some are 20, 25, we were 25 3 days ago, we may be at 33, we were 33% a few days prior, which was one of the top tier. I mean, it just goes day to day, it depends when you look at the data. Still inexcusable. But if this country administered all the vaccines, it diminished. I mean, a very small percentage of Americans would have it. So the reality is, there's this sort of false notion that we're in a race to reopen with the vaccines. Well, that may be true, but there's this sort of false pretense that somehow the vaccines are plentiful when they're not. They're still in a frame of scarcity. And so we are preparing for the day where there's a framework of abundance. And we look forward to that with the next administration. But we're in a scarcity frame now, and we've tried to prioritize within that scarcity frame, but we now acknowledge, and that was the change yesterday, specifically, that we needed to loosen up those tiers, and we have now. So we're going to see faster administration. You'll see that. Hold me accountable, you will. Next week, I told you the goal, $1 million. End of the week, 10 days. So that's the goal, specific goal, we have specific plan. Trying to hold folks accountable at all levels, across the spectrum. That was our deeper conversation yesterday after 100 conversations over the course of the last many, many months. We've been working on this for some time. Similar struggles are happening most other states in the country. Not an excuse. So we are committing ourselves with resolve to address those issues. And I'm very mindful of the urgency to do so. So as more vaccines come into the state, we will then broaden the spectrum to include the folks on this slide. This is phase 1C. This may include many more of you, folks that are watching, folks that may be here, maybe even you, Carla. In this sector, phase 1C are individuals 50 and over, but also 16 to 64 that have medical conditions and or disability. That's that next phase. But this phase has to happen, or will only happen, when we have millions and millions of doses that currently are not available. But we're preparing for that. And with urgency, we are preparing for that. Now, you asked about the National Guard. We have the National Guard. We are using the National Guard. We have National Guard strike teams that are administering these vaccines. You ask about emergency powers. You don't need to exercise your emergency powers. You need to exercise your role and responsibility to encourage state agencies, local governmental actors to move more quickly and be more flexible. We did that this week specifically with the dentists, and now dentists can administer the shots. We did that through what you may, others may refer to as an emergency declaration. It was just a simple waiver where we did provide pharmacy techs the ability to administer. We have dozens and dozens of individuals and job descriptions now where people can administer. And so we have been exercising that authority, just to clear the decks on those concerns or that question, and in particular the issue of the National Guard. So we're going to do more of that, and we're going to broaden the spectrum of those supports. There's new dollars coming in will allow us to do more of that. But the most important thing I think we did in the last 48 hours, and that is increase the flexibility between tiers. And I would expect, and you should expect, that we are going to see a substantially higher number of vaccines administered in the coming days and weeks.
To follow up on that, by when can you promise most Californians they can get that vaccine? And also the issue on the Trump 25th Amendment.
Yeah, I told you I'm not focused on that. I took the latter part of that question. I'm just focused on vaccines. I'm focused on the budget. So forgive me on the latter part of that question and the follow-up. But specifically, again, when will the majority, which suggests 20 million Californians, have access to the vaccine? No human being, the president on down, current and future president, Anthony Fauci himself, could not answer that question. The CEO of Pfizer can't answer that question. The CEO of Moderna, J&J, folks out there at Oxford, can't answer that question. It's when the vaccines are produced at scale and made available to the state, then we can answer the question, 20 plus million Californians can have access. We're hoping that happens in the first quarter of next year, or this year. And we're hoping by April, May, we're really starting to scale across all of these phases, across all of these tiers. And we've dealt substantially with all of the impediments and all the logistical challenges. But we are in a scarce frame, just 2 million doses having arrived, 4 million people, prioritizing the vaccinators that vaccinate, or rather, we want to vaccinate the vaccinators and healthcare workers as a first priority, and then seniors in congregate facilities. And now with these 2 tiers, which I hope the slide's still up, to broaden the flexibility so that there's no waste in terms of the distribution. And as I said, here's your next thing to hold me accountable to: 1 million doses within the next, not 10 days, it was 10 days yesterday when I announced it to the team, 9 days.
Hi, Governor. Ashley Zavala with Nexstar Media Group. I know on eviction moratorium extension, you want the legislature to work within the coming weeks on this. I was wondering if there's a date, a month, a time in 2021 that you're hoping to extend it to.
That's part of the negotiations, part of the give and take, part of the back and forth. What made the last negotiation successful is that every time I was asked about it in public, I didn't answer the question specifically in an effort to create a process of trust with the critical groups that we're currently negotiating with, and to express my respect for the legislative leaders that are working overtime to advance this cause. I'll maintain that stubbornly, I know, and forgive me in advance, as we are engaged now in the midst of engagement with all of the parties and legislative leaders on this extension of this moratorium that's due to expire on the 31st of this month.
On that note, what do you say to Californians who are facing that deadline, in a matter of weeks?
That we are resolved, we are committed. The reason I amplified the point today on multiple occasions in this presentation is that it's a top priority for me, and I know the legislative leaders, and so we are going to find a way to get it done, just as we did the last time. So that's what I would say. We see you, we hear you, we're very mindful of your anxiety, your stress, and we will get something done.
Hi, Governor. Alexi Casa from the San Francisco Chronicle. You mentioned a couple days ago wanting to use this budget process to more quickly get the federal rent relief to Californians, but we haven't heard any specifics yet on how that's going to happen. So what is the state specifically doing to get that money to people? When should people who need it expect to get it, and how?
So it's $2.6 billion. 1.4 comes to the state. 1.2 billion of the 2.6 goes to districts with populations larger than 200,000. There's flexibility that resides within both buckets. What we're currently trying to do, specific to your question, is work across the jurisdictions, CSAC, it's our county partners, League of Cities, our city partners, and working with legislative leaders that care deeply about this, including the two leaders, the Assembly and the Senate, and their staffs, to figure out a partnership, a process to partner, to make sure we're amplifying efforts, not duplicating efforts. We have to be mindful of a spectrum of considerations. You may recall in the deal that we established and announced late August that expires on January 31st, that there's a payback provision of 25% that goes into effect. There's also considerations, not just, as I noted earlier, tenants, but also small landlords that are under the gun and stressed as it relates to banking relationships and the like. And so all of those have to be considered. We are in the midst of exchanging ideas, not only with legislative leaders, but key coalition partners, the same partners that helped us bring this original deal to the fore and ultimately through the legislative process and signature. So all of that's happening in real time. Now, on the $2.6 billion, it's important to note, that's the commitment from the feds. Those dollars are just starting to come in. So we can't put something out that hasn't come in yet. And so those dollars are coming this week. We're starting to see some of the loosening of the dollars. Other dollars are starting to come in across the spectrum. And so as quick as they come in, once we have the appropriate framework, we'll get those dollars right out. And so there's urgency across the spectrum. We are deeply engaged and deeply mindful that this needs to happen in days, not weeks, because January 31st is around the corner. And if we're going to move legislation, you have to have an agreement very, very shortly, both on the moratorium and both on the distribution of those federal dollars to parallel and to support those broader deals. We have to have those in the next number of days, or at least within the next week or so.
So, given the urgency that you recognize, is there a timeline at this point for when people might expect to receive that money? Are you looking at some kind of application process? I mean, what is the framework that you're developing?
We're figuring out there is no framework that's been pre-established. So we have to determine the framework. We have to determine the partnerships. Do you work? This is a negotiation. There are all kinds of considerations. Here's just to lay it bare. Here's what I'm trying to avoid. That the cities get $1 billion+ and they go in 20 different directions. State gets in and we duplicate some of the directions, we replicate them, but we go in another direction. We're not amplifying, we're not coordinating, we're not supporting. We may use CDFIs, they may not. They may use trusted existing partners with rental assistance programs. They have philanthropic, all that has to be part of a broader, and I use CDFIs just as a proxy for the kind of intermediaries that exist, not literally, but figuratively in that rental frame. As a former mayor, San Francisco has dozens of different partners and nonprofits, not just state, rather local administering functions at the county level. So the state's mindful of that. We're working through all those issues. We're trying to figure out what the rules and flexibility are with the federal dollars, see how far we can go. So all of that's just happening. All I can say in real time. I wish I could announce the details of a detailed proposal, but at this moment, we're in the middle of those negotiations.
And then one more follow-up on Katie's question from earlier. You've had to quarantine twice in the past 2 months because of exposure to the coronavirus. So why, given the fact that it has directly affected you, do you still feel it's more appropriate for you to wait on a vaccine?
Let me be candid with you. I have people that have my cell phone that are desperate for a vaccine. And I'm just being honest with you as a human being. When I just had a back and forth with someone that used to work for us, incredible woman, worked for me at the Health and Human Service Agency when I was a county supervisor, retired when I became mayor. Her husband's very ill. He's desperate to get the vaccine. And I spent a good deal of time trying to help her just because my heart was heavy. And all I can think about is, I'm going to get a vaccine before he does. I can't do that. That's my answer. I can do my job, folks. We're doing it. And I like to think I'm still young, reasonably healthy. Maybe that's the answer to the question. Is that it? Well, that's a good way to end. I'm young, still reasonably young and healthy. Not sure after those questions, but God bless all of you. Thank you for the privilege of this time. And now for the show you've been waiting for, which is the, and by the way, let me just thank Keely and her team, as always. Forgive me. Rock star budget team, our finance team, HD, who, we joke. I say, who's the HD of this agency? He's a brand in of himself. These guys are remarkable. Keely's done another amazing job, and her entire team. I know she'll recognize them. Thank Ana Montesantos. I want to thank Ann O'Leary, whose last day is today. She worked hard for months on this budget. I want to thank all of our team for the hours and hours. Hard to describe. No one particularly cares, but matters to at least those of us who worked on it. This is hundreds of hours of work, long weekends, long nights, and I just want to applaud and thank them. And again, in closing, I say again only because I want to reinforce, if I wasn't clear enough, just in anticipation and expectation and gratitude with the California legislature, to the Pro Tem Tony Atkins, to our Speaker Anthony Rendon, to the budget chairs Ting and Skinner, to all of the legislative leaders. Thank you in advance for the seriousness of purpose. I know we will have an extraordinary give and take, this dialectic we're all well familiar with, but the spirit of this moment, I think, and the values that we speak to today, I think really will define the next few months, and I'm confident in our capacity to do big things and do them quickly. And so thank you to the legislature in advance. With that, Keely Bosser and the finance team to actually answer all the detailed questions on this year's budget.
Good afternoon. I just want to start by saying thank you again to the Department of Finance, the whole team. It's a huge effort every year, all through the holidays, but this year on top of an incredibly difficult year. And so just really a lot of appreciation for all of their commitment under these unprecedented conditions that we're all living with. I wanted to talk a little bit about vaccines just at the top. The $372 million number is an estimate. We had to put that together before the first vaccination came to the state. It's roughly based on an allocation of resources, not just for information technology that's responsible for getting us the numbers about how and who is getting vaccinated, but also logistics and commodities about distribution to different vaccination sites, and then communications, making sure that people understand the safety around the vaccines, and that we do get a high vaccination rate. The strategies to deploy the vaccines quickly are changing real time as we identify gaps in the county infrastructure around the state, and so those numbers can go up. As we have seen since the pandemic began, we are in an emergency posture. So what is needed, we are able to take from the reserve and allocate for the immediate needs. And so the 372 is really just an estimate at this time, and things are really changing rapidly and will continue to be adjusted as we go forward. I thought maybe I'd just start with crosswalking between our surplus and the LAOs, since that's the last point of reference that everybody really has focused on. Theirs was a $26 billion number. As opposed to the past, we actually have a very similar view of the revenues to the LAO, and that's not a big difference in the surplus number. The two pieces that are different are the interpretation of Proposition 2 in the current year. That's about $4.5 billion worth of the difference. We do true up the current year by putting more money into the reserve in the current year, even though we did take that emergency withdrawal last year to help balance the budget in 2021. The second piece is that their estimates just do not reflect all of the expenditures on emergencies, especially wildfires, and some of the COVID response emergencies that we had that information. So that they will be adjusting their numbers when they come out later this month. Just a little bit also about federal funds. Obviously, the stimulus was put to bed well after we were putting our budget, finalizing our budget. So those monies are not reflected in the budget. We are working real time on different technical things that we will need to work with the legislature in terms of appropriations or other current year language that will allow us to move quickly to move those monies through. They are also not reflected in our economic estimates because it is over $100 billion coming into the state from that stimulus. That does have an impact, and we will reflect that impact in our updated revisions in April. At that, I'd really like to answer any questions that people have to follow up on anything that was in the governor's presentation.
I know the governor said earlier that there were no tax increases that he's proposing. I know last year there were several, I guess you could call them temporary tax increases or changes. Are those gone now, or are those still in the budget?
No, those are not gone. Those were temporary. They were for a 3-year period, and the budget still reflects those proposals from last year that were enacted by the legislature. There are a few things. There's no general tax increases. There are some issues that are specific to certain parts of the budget. For example, the Department of Toxic Substances Control. We continue to pursue major reforms there, not just in how that department and their mission is funded, but also governance changes to that department. So that's still reflected in the budget. That was a proposal that we made last year as well. The other proposal that is an increase that's targeted is an increase on the pesticide mill fee. That increase would support not just the reduction of harmful pesticides in our agricultural system, but it also will be supporting the transition to those more integrated and regenerative approaches that have use fewer toxic pesticides. So those are two pieces that do require 2/3 vote, and we'll be asking the legislature to adopt.
I also wanted to ask, I know the LAO referred to it as a windfall, as one time. I think I heard the governor refer to it at least once as a surplus. I just wanted to get the administration's thinking of this windfall or surplus.
Right. So there's a significant revision upward in the revenue forecast. There's no other way to say that. Three things that are really the impacts. First of all, we got it wrong in April about how deep the recession was going to be. Second of all, we also got it wrong that there was more inequality in the impacts of this pandemic than we expected. And then the third thing is just that the stock market has gone up and up and up, which was not in our forecast. So those three factors are the main factors driving the revenue. We do think that it is mainly one time, which the governor put up the slide with the structural deficits. We still project that expenditures are going to outpace revenues starting in the budget year +1, so in 22-23. So we see the highest level ever in capital gains, $185 billion in capital gains. That's resulting in $18.5 billion in tax revenues. That is an old story about the volatility of revenues, but it still exists today. That's something that's really driving some of those Prop 2 deposits, which are obviously really critical to us maintaining the stability and being able to support programs over the long term.
And finally, if I may, just with this surplus or windfall, can you say like how you're spending it, or is it just kind of absorbed into the budget?
Yes. So the roughly $15 billion surplus, and we have sort of a different frame here than we've had in the past, but the $34 billion of resiliency is a combination of our reserves and also the discretionary surplus. But we always build the operating reserve into our discretionary surplus because that's a choice. We could choose to spend that, but we choose to leave some in that operating reserve. First thing that this $15 billion, so the first thing that $15 billion is being spent on is a $2.9 billion operating reserve. We're also restoring all the suspended programs for the year. That means we've moved those suspensions out a full year. That's $1.3 billion. We've got another $4 billion that's broadly for the jobs and economic recovery packages that have been in various forms. And I just want to caution because there are a lot of different tables in our budget, and I think those will be helpful. Some of the things like in the jobs and economic recovery, $14 billion page, they are tax credits so that the way they hit our budget are actually different than how they're reflected because that revenue loss will be in future years, usually. The other thing is housing and homelessness. There's $2.3 billion on housing and homelessness, around $786 million for UC and CSU. We are building in, again, emergency response is still the primary day-to-day for government right now on the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have built in an estimate of another $700 million that some of it we don't know what is going to come up around the corner, but important to hold space in our budget to make sure that we can address the emergencies as they come up. another $675 million for both the fire prevention and forest health, but also in increasing our firefighting capabilities going into the next fire season. We have about $1 billion in money going towards different health and human services efforts, including CalAIM, also a innovative new big idea on addressing the population that we refer to as the incompetent to stand trial population. These are populations that are often being held in our jails, waiting for transfer to state mental hospitals. Then we also have a whole host of other adjustments that add up to about $1 billion too. So those are the broad strokes of where the governor has prioritized this surplus. The biggest one being jobs and economic recovery, and making sure that the state is well positioned to accelerate its recovery once we have the pandemic under control and people are vaccinated. And so that's a very high priority. Really important to note that when we talk about discretionary surplus, that doesn't include the Proposition 98 estimate. And so that's also a huge priority for this budget.
Theo Douglas, TechWire.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for taking my question. I'm interested to hear, to the extent that it's known, perhaps either from a sheer financial commitment or scope or simply its aim, is there a sense yet of what may be the state's most significant IT project in this budget that we might see head to procurement this year?
So we're continuing. So one of the things that we're doing, and the governor went through this, but we're making some major investments in the Department of Technology to have that agency be able to really get in and spot problems before they occur. In the recent years, there's been a lot of triage and emergencies that the Department of Technology has leaned in on and has supported, but we want to make sure that they are also having a proactive ability to get in there. There are lots of projects that are in the pipeline, and so I don't know that I'm going to be able to speak specifically, but we continue to work to support a new payroll system for the state. That's going to be a very big deal, working very closely with the state controller's office and with the government operations agency and CalHR, who are all of government will be involved, similar to our Fiscal budget system. So that will be a very big undertaking. There also continues to be a lot of work in the Health and Human Services Agency on many of the large IT projects there, including the child welfare system.
Hi, Laurel Rosenhall with Cal Matters. The summary chart by agency describes an almost 82% reduction in EPA or environmental protection and a more than 300% increase in labor and workforce development. Those being two huge changes, could you just give us a sense of what's included in those reductions and increases?
So a lot of those are probably driven by the backing out of one-time money, and I'm going to have to get back to you specifically on those those changes, because I don't have that at my fingertips. But the workforce development, there's a large increase in additional money for workforce development that we have in the budget, and that's probably a portion of the labor and workforce piece. In terms of EPA, I need to get back to you. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. And then also, is there a allocation on broadband? I know the governor said something that's something he wants to do, but is there like a fee or a bond, or how?
There are so many different strategies that have already been introduced in the legislature, and it is a high priority for the governor to work collaboratively with the legislature to make significant progress on broadband for all plan that really addresses some of the really nagging issues that the state has faced for years, not just in urban areas, but in the rural areas. It's going to take different strategies, and we're going to want to position ourselves to be able to take advantage of additional federal monies that we're anticipating as well. So we don't have a specific proposal is the short answer, and we want to work directly with the legislature on the shared priority to really make meaningful progress in expanding broadband.
Thank you. One quick final one on state worker compensation, which was cut last year. Would you describe that as being restored this year, or just possibly depending on each bargaining unit's priorities?
So we have a statement on this. Specifically, we hope to be able to restore the pay reductions in the budget year, but we need to look at the May revision to see if that is something that can be afforded, and we'll make a determination at that time. And we would also plan to restore anything through the collective bargaining process once we make that determination.
Thank you.
Hi, Keely. Sophia Bolay with the Sacramento Bee. I know you talked about the vaccine money up at the top, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding that money correctly. So the $372 million, is that the same as the $300+ million that the governor talked about on Monday?
It is. It
Okay.
is. It's an estimate. So there is not there. It looks like it's a precise number, but I will say it is an estimate based on early plans on how what the state needed to do to fill in the gaps to get that done. So that's.
Got it. And so is that going to be coming out of an emergency account?
Correct. So we would work with the legislature as we have throughout the year on emergency spending allocations through working with the Joint Legislative Budget Committee and thinking and making sure that we're identifying and working with them collaboratively on how to address these emergency expenditures that are driving real costs that impact the budget.
Got it. And so will the proposal as it's currently written, will it require legislative approval? I understand he's going to work with legislators on that, particular spending, but will they need to ultimately approve it, or can he just spend that money?
Since we've been in the COVID-19 emergency, we have this account, the disaster response emergency account, and that is the money that we do notify the legislature when we're transferring money into that account, and then we've had a regular cadence of meetings and briefings, especially when exceptional new expenditure items are coming up, and so we can continue to do that. So the short answer, again, sorry I started with the long answer, is that we do not need approval to expend that money because it's part of the overall emergency response.
Got it. And just to confirm, that figure, I understand it's an estimate, but it doesn't currently include any federal money that
It doesn't.
Okay.
So it's also just an estimate of what the spending is. It doesn't necessarily assume how it's paid for. We wanted to make sure and hold space in the general fund, but there's an opportunity for it to be offset by federal funding. Again, we put this budget together before we knew what the final federal actions were going to be. The bottom line on vaccines is that real-time strategies are changing and adjusting, and the money to make sure that distribution goes well and expedited we will spend what we need to spend on that from the emergency allocations.
Got it. And then I just have one question about the supplemental payments that Newsom has proposed for low-income families.
Yeah.
So the way I understand the way the governor is proposing that those be allocated is you would take the families who received an EITC benefit from the 2019 tax year, so those who received it last year, and then you would also give it to ITIN filers who will be eligible for the 2020 year, so who are filing their taxes this year. Will that leave out any families who were not eligible in 2019, who are not ITIN filers, but who are eligible in 2020?
Possibly, and that's something that we're looking at. I think when we put this proposal together, I think this is, again, before the federal government acted and to extend the UI benefits, the plan was to get it out as quickly as possible. And because the EITC filings really are, very dependent on you getting your W-2 and, filing your federal tax return at the same time, those deadlines meant that those individuals would not get that payment until March, April, which is when most EITC filers do file. And so we wanted to go quickly, and that's why we used the 2019 recipients as the pool. Certainly, there has been a lot of changes to people's individual household income, and there are potentially some individuals who didn't qualify in 2019 that could qualify in 2020. And so that is something that we are looking at, and we're continuing to work with the legislature, but that is not part of the proposal because the idea was to go quickly and get that stimulus out on the street as quickly as possible.
Got it. So at this point, anyone who might be left out in that sort of gap, the governor's proposal is not to cover those people at the moment. But it's being
the $2.4 billion reflects an estimate. So the $2.4 billion in expenditures reflects an estimate based on the 2019 filers, plus our estimate of who would have been eligible, who are ITIN filers that were not eligible for the 2019 tax year, but will be in 2020.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Angela Hart, Kaiser Health News.
Yes.
Thank you, Keely. I want to wanted to just run through some questions, really, on the three of them for fact checking around the COVID proposed expenditures. Can you hear me, okay, Keely?
Yes, I absolutely can.
Okay, thank you. I just want to. The governor presented a slide showing $4.4 billion for testing and for vaccines and tracing. In the budget, when it talks about those things, it talks about those programs, those funding for the programs as it's already passed. So I just want to be clear, that $4.4 billion, is that a new proposed expenditure in the budget? And if so, can you point me to where that is broken down?
Yes, so it's on page 46. And this is a table that you will be familiar with because it's one that we've been updating throughout the pandemic, and we actually updated it a few times this fall since the Budget Act estimate. Again, these are slightly different because these are estimates. This is an emergency. It's dynamic. We do try and project and plan some expenditures, and that's what the $4.4 billion reflects. So, but the $4.4 billion is in comparison to what was included in the 2020 Budget Act, and so some of it are related to things that are already in process, like the Valencia lab, like the increased contact tracing that we've been doing, like all of the CDCR emergency expenditures to manage and reduce the spread in the prisons. So it is a slightly different thing because we are in this emergency, and it's a complex emergency with a lot of different lines of effort. And so we're really trying to make sure that the people of California have the transparency and understanding of where the money is going in the emergency.
So what's the right way to explain that? It's not, sorry, I just have a couple.
So the budget, I would say the budget reflects updated estimates of COVID-19 emergency response of $4.4 billion additional money.
But that's not a new proposed expenditure, correct?
No, it's just some of them, again, it's all coming out of the reserve, so it is not brand new. I guess the answer is right. It is not brand new. It's an updated estimate.
Hi, Keely. Nicole Nixon with Cap Radio. I see 2 new offices being created here, housing accountability and healthcare affordability. Can the administration just create those offices, or do they need a bill from the legislature to do that?
So not a new office in housing, but a new office of healthcare affordability. And that's something we will need to work with the legislature on establishing. It's something we've been working on from pre-pandemic times. Really important to increase cost transparency and also work to reduce the cost of healthcare so we can move more closely to expand healthcare to all Californians.
And then can you just briefly talk about ideal budgets for these?
Oh gosh, thank you. I don't know if I have that at my fingertips, but I will get that for you. The other office that we're creating is within the Department of Healthcare Services, and it's related to Medicare and innovation. We look forward to working with the next administration at the federal level on different ways that we can leverage our state's Medicaid system and the Medicare benefits that are obviously received by many millions of Californians to really expand the long-term care and supports that are available to individuals who are not on Medi-Cal but are on Medicare.
One more question. I'm sorry if this has been addressed. I see on homelessness 1.75 billion. Is that mostly for room key and home key? And is that all that's in the budget? And to me, that says that these projects have been successful. The governor just wants to spend money building on them.
Yes. So 1.75 billion is the resources that are dedicated directly to homelessness. It's all reflects investments in additional infrastructure. 750 million will build on the home key efforts to purchase motels around the state that really provide a very good and cost-effective way to stand up a lot of housing quickly. But then we have two other additional strategies, recognizing there are a lot of complex needs in the homeless population and there's different continuum of care that's needed. We have 750 million for healthcare services that will specifically support grants to counties to build or to purchase facilities for short-term mental health stays and to support individuals that are experiencing mental illness. The second piece is 250 million through the Department of Social Services to really take extra care to purchase and expand or rehabilitate our residential care for the elderly homes, which are small homes that are an incredibly important part of our senior housing continuum. And so we want to make sure and wrap around those homes to both preserve and grow the availability of those low-cost options for seniors.
Jackie Fox, Cal Matters.
Yes.
Hi there. So the budget document, thank you so much for taking these questions. The budget document references $1.3 billion in food assistance for California. And I'm wondering if you are getting information about what that will look like. Is that more pandemic EBT or continued SNAP benefits or something new?
Stay tuned. I mean, we're checking websites daily and also working directly with our members of our staff that work in Washington, D.C. to make sure that we're following all of the guidance that the federal government's putting out on those new monies. So we will have to get back to you on what exactly that additional money will be able to be allocated to.
Hi, Keely. It's Alexi from the San Francisco Chronicle. I just wanted to clarify something you mentioned earlier. I think you said there were about $1.3 billion in suspensions that were being reversed. This is separate from the program cuts that the state had hoped to use the federal money for? So could you clarify what those are?
Absolutely. There's some confusions about that. There were two different sets of reductions last year. There was these programs that we were suspending, and they were not suspended in the current fiscal year. They were suspended starting July 1 of 2021, and most of them January 1, 2022. And so those programs have not been cut. A lot of them are recent expansions to the state's health and human services programs, but they also include a 7% reduction in IHSS, as well as some reductions in provider rates. So those things have not been cut. They weren't cut last year, and now we're actually proposing to further delay those suspensions We keep them on, the governor, we have proposed to keep them on the books, if you will, for future years, because we obviously do have structural deficits starting in 22, 23, and it may be that we will need to use those suspensions to help balance our budget. The other thing that you're referring to is the trigger cuts, or the cuts that went into effect that we were hoping, that went into effect July 1, but we were hoping for federal funds to buy those cuts out. Those cuts happened starting July 1, and we have various proposals that make additional investments in all of the areas that were cut. The judicial branch, UC and CSU are both getting 3% growth. The judicial branch is getting 3.6% growth, I believe, a COLA there, as well as child support services. There have been restorations made in that program as well, given the revised revenue estimates. And then, of course, our state employees, I talked about that earlier. We hope that we have additional money to be able to restore the budget year reductions, and we will make a final determination in May, and we will work through the collective bargaining process on implementing that determination.
Hi, Keely, it's Adam again.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this. I think earlier you said we're expecting about $100 billion from the federal stimulus. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. And we have a table actually in Chapter 1 that reflects, it's on page 5. The vast majority is going to people, which is very important. $20 billion in unemployment insurance benefits and $18 billion for economic impact payments. So that stimulus was really so important to the nearly 4 million people still receiving some form of unemployment, and that will extend through March.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.